Chapter 278. Serene didn't put much effort into the extraction of the tricolored bean's toxins. He spent most of the time watching from the sidelines. Serene knew quite a bit about the process of extracting and purifying effective toxins from plants and repairing some of the defects in the molecules. Therefore, according to Serene's past experience, a job like this involved a lot of analysis and calculation, and it required a higher level of knowledge from the worker. If a person were to complete the entire process alone, it would take more than half a day to complete. However, Neo was already used to it. He completed all the work in just 2 hours, and even perfected the toxins that were specifically targeted at a biohuman's constitution. Serene couldn't help but admire him for this. Serene was also able to complete all the work in this short period of time, but this was mainly because of Serene's own uniqueness. At the very least, up until now, Serene had never seen anyone who could complete so much work in such a short period of time. Even the affiliated schools were a bit lacking in this regard. In this regard, Neo was like a precise calculating machine. Moreover, he had an extraordinary nature and ability to predict his research target. The moment he started working on a project, he had already planned out the next step, and even more steps and calculations in his mind. Of course, there were certain aspects of this machine that were not working normally. Neo could be called a genius. Just like Neo's obsessive-compulsive tendency to digitize his daily life, he was also very strict when it came to his experiment. Even the RES thought that the precision of his data was too harsh. After 2 hours of forgetful work, Neo held a small bottle of orange-yellow liquid in his hand and shouted excitedly, "It's finally out!" These toxins were slightly different from the natural toxins extracted from the tricolored bean, but theoretically speaking, these toxins were more effective against biosoldiers. Here, use these to fight biosoldiers. It's best if you do it around here. I can see and record the data from here and test the effect. Neo handed the 3 bottles in his hand to Serene and said. Serene was already used to Neo's self-centered way of speaking. Those who didn't know Neo well would misunderstand his commanding tone. This guy didn't seem to know how to be tactful. He was so direct that it made people want to slap him. It just so happened that Gu Xian had pretty much recovered by now, and this was mainly because of Gu Xian's physical constitution. According to Neo, Gu Xian's physical constitution was pretty good. His body had developed a resistance to the poison, and he would be fine the next time he came into contact with the same type of poisonous meat. "Aren't you afraid of getting poisoned?" Serene asked Neo. Even if the Black Viper's people had a safe place to stay and heat up their food, they couldn't guarantee that all the food was safe, right? How could a physique like Neo's and Ah Shou's, whose eyes were red from crying and who was still hiccuping non-stop, possibly compare to Gu Xian? "Oh, about that. We were vaccinated before we came here, and we were also injected with the compound antiserum. We won't be as bad as you guys. Also, we were given antidotes and some backup drugs. Speaking of which, Ah Shou, what are you doing here instead of staying at your own place?" Neo was very displeased with Ah Shou's behavior. Serene and Gu Xian covered their faces. Ah Shou, who had just stopped crying, was crying and hiccuping again. It was stolen by the bad guys, ugh. Ah Shou's tears started flowing like floodgates. Ah Shou had gone up the mountain to take in some fresh air and have some fun. Who would have thought that a bunch of strangers would enter her place when she returned? They wanted to capture Ah Shou, but Ah Shou slipped away like the wind. Unfortunately for her, she ran into a dangerous person like Gu Xian right after she left the tiger's den. Ah Shou had to have a way to protect herself since she was able to make it here. Just like Neo, she was a fast runner, but Ah Shou was even faster. Ah Shou's physique was special. Her bones were a lot lighter than a normal person's, and her body was thin and delicate. But according to Neo, Ah Shou could run as fast as a tornado, and Gu Xian had confirmed it himself. If he hadn't used some tricks, there was no way he could have caught Ah Shou. Then why didn't you bring him to your place and let them fight each other? Neo said. Gu Xian looked at Neo, and then at the hiccuping and crying Ah Shou. In the end, he still felt that Ah Shou was the better choice. Ah Shou paused for a moment when she heard Neo's words. Then, she cried even harder. You, he said. I'll take him to a safe, place, but my place is, not safe anymore. Neo said with a look of disdain, I seriously doubt your intelligence. Hui Mao, who was licking his claws next to Ah Shou, flicked his ears and looked at Neo before continuing to lick his claws. Sillin guessed that the bad guys Ah Shou was talking about were people who were brought here to be tested just like him and Gu Xian. However, he didn't know who else was in this place other than the military. Gu Xian admitted that he was from the military, but he kept his mouth shut about which military unit he belonged to. Both he and Sillin kept their backgrounds a secret, and Neo and Ah Shou weren't interested in it either. Therefore, everyone got along fairly well with each other. The name Gu Xian was definitely his real name, but Gu Xian didn't seem to be afraid that someone would investigate this name. Sillin guessed that if someone really did go to the military to investigate this name, they would definitely receive the news that this person is deceased. The people who were allowed to come here were definitely the special kind of people in the military, and their records had been altered a long time ago. All right, the two of you should go and try out my research results, Neo urged. Originally, he was planning to shoot through a couple of hidden windows on the cliff, but unfortunately, a flock of flying beasts had been passing through this place recently. For the sake of the 37% chance of being discovered, Neo gave up on that place and ordered Sillin and Gu Xian to stand guard at the top of the tree. Sillin and Gu Xian took the two modified guns Neo gave them and moved to the top of the tree. Each thick branch was just big enough to fit one person, so Sillin and Gu Xian hid here and waited. Hui Mao volunteered to lure the bio-soldiers away. Are braids allowed in the military? Sillin asked Gu Xian. According to military rules, a small braid like this wasn't welcomed by the officers. It wasn't allowed at first, but it became allowed later on. Gu Xian didn't say much, but the moment he mentioned it, Gu Xian immediately recalled something from the past. He had grown used to having braids since he was young, but on his first day in the military, he was ordered to shave his head with a knife, and Gu Xian beat the crap out of that officer. Gu Xian was a troublemaker, and every officer who taught him loved and hated him at the same time. However, he couldn't keep his braids until he entered that special place. They're here. Sillin and Gu Xian waited in the thick branches they had chosen. Holding the guns Neo gave them, they watched the 5 bio-soldiers running in the distance. Hui Mao was running in front of the 5 bio-soldiers while shouting smugly. He was treating this as a game. The distance between the tree and the bio-soldiers was about 3,000 meters, and the wind blew occasionally on this side of the cliff. Therefore, it was a bit difficult. Neo definitely wouldn't be able to hit the bio-soldiers, and he would be able to graze the bio-soldiers' skin without moving. When the bio-soldiers reached the spot Sillin had predicted, Sillin fired without hesitation. One of the running bio-soldiers was shot in the abdomen. It collapsed limply to the ground and died 2 seconds later. This shot didn't hit a vital spot. It was only 5 centimeters away from where Sillin had predicted it would be. However, this was also part of his and Neo's plan. The first shot was to test the effect of a non-vital spot. Very good, shoot their heads again. Neo's excited voice came from the communicator. They were communicating through the communicator provided by Neo, so they wouldn't be detected by the flying beasts that occasionally flew by. Once again, a flying beast stood on the branch Sillin was standing on and pecked at its fur. It didn't notice anything amiss. Gu Xian fired the second shot, and it hit a bio-soldier in the head. The effect was similar to the one Sillin had killed. All right, the next one is to shoot their vitals, Neo said. Sillin's third shot hit a bio-soldier's vitals, and the effect was obvious. The bio-soldier died almost immediately. The bullets used in Neo's gun weren't very powerful. Even if a bio-soldier was shot in a vitals, it wouldn't die immediately without the help of the drugs. It would struggle for 3 to 5 seconds. However, it was a different story after the drugs were combined. Gu Xian raised an eyebrow when he saw Silen's shot, but he didn't say anything. He was surprised that Silen was able to find a bio-soldier's vitals without firing a shot in the head first. Have you collected all the data? Silen asked Neo. If he hadn't, then he would shoot their vitals. Shoot another bio-soldier's vitals to confirm it. Alright. Silen raised his gun and fired again. Another of the 2 remaining bio-soldiers that were running in circles with Huimao collapsed. Confirmation complete. Let's shoot the arm for the last one. Neo's tone was filled with joy. It looked like the effects of the drugs were pretty good. Gu Xian was the one who fired the last shot. He hit the bio-soldier's right arm. The bio-soldier that was shot in the right arm died a few seconds longer than it should have, but the result was still pretty good. With this drug, they would have an extra layer of protection even if they ran into a group of bio-soldiers in the forest. Are these the only 5? Silen asked. That's it for now. You guys can come back now. Silen summoned Huimao back to his side and returned to the safe zone under the tree. Neo had already gone into his lab to process the data. He ignored them because he had some compressed food in his locker. All he needed to do was decompress it. There was a display in the living room that displayed the situation outside. Silen and the others sat there and started eating after they decompressed the food. They watched the scene outside while they ate. Huimao crouched at the side and didn't eat. It had already eaten when it went out to play with the bio-soldiers. While licking its paws, Huimao's attention was attracted by Gu Xian's pigtail. It stuck out its butt and stretched its back. Then, it ran to the back of Gu Xian's chair and played with Gu Xian's pigtail with its paw. Gu Xian blocked the cat's paw with the handle of his spoon. The next moment, the cat's paw came to play with his whip. Gu Xian turned to look at Huimao and was rendered speechless by the cat's eyes that looked like it was looking at a toy. Suddenly, Ah Shou, who was burping and drinking juice, shuddered. He scratched his arm and said in a soft voice, "It's going to hail." Silen and Gu Xian turned to look at Ah Shou. Ah Shou shrunk his head and looked timidly at Silen and Gu Xian. Then, he burped and said in a small voice, "There will be a hail in an hour." Both Silen and Gu Xian were very puzzled. In fact, Gu Xian didn't even mind that the gray cat was playing with his pigtails with its claws. They didn't sense anything out of the ordinary when they went out to shoot the bio-soldiers. The weather was fine and there were no signs of it happening. It's only been a while, and it's already going to hail? In this kind of weather? Based on past experience, there's a 99% chance that Ah Shou's prediction will come true, Neo said after he finished processing the data. Will this place be affected if it hails? Silen asked. No, the buildings here are very reliable. However, a hail usually lasts for more than 5 days. Also, Neo looked at Silen and Gu Xian. The food stored here doesn't include you two, so it'll be very difficult to get out if it hails. Therefore, it's best if you two go out and stock up on food before it starts. Silen and Gu Xian exchanged a glance with each other before swiftly finishing the food on their plates. Then, they put on their equipment. Before they left, Neo handed them a list of plants and food he needed like it was a matter of course. The corner of Silen's eyes twitched. Let's see how it goes. I'll bring you some if we run into it. Of course. Neo nonchalantly went back to his room to sleep. In the past, I would have beat him up for sure, Gu Xian said after he came out. It was true that Neo's tone was very confusing, but he didn't feel like he had offended anyone in the slightest. The same sentence, even if it was a compliment, sounded very sarcastic when it came out of his mouth. Are all the Black Nightmares freaks like this? Gu Xian asked Silen. I don't know, but the two I've encountered are freaks. If the dissecting freak Wally was included, then all three of them were freaks. Both Silin and Gu Xian's targets were small beasts. After they processed the meat, they put it into a bag and heated it up when they returned. The duo's speed was very fast, and the recovered Gu Xian displayed his extraordinary strength. Small beasts were almost effortless to him. They ran into two large beasts along the way, but the duo swiftly took care of them together. Hui Mao went to look for Moya's nut. He had no interest in provoking any more beasts after he was full. Hui Mao's ears twitched while he was packing the nut. He said to Silin and Gu Xian, "Someone's coming." Silin and Gu Xian swiftly hid themselves. The bag containing the beast meat had the ability to block out smell and camouflage. It was very difficult to be discovered if they used grass and branches to hide themselves. After Silin hid himself, he quietly waited for the person who was approaching from afar. The person was moving very fast. He looked like he was running away from something, and he was holding a bone knife in his hand. It was probably made from the bones of a large beast he had killed. The bone was very hard, and it was a good weapon against normal beasts. Gu Xian frowned when he saw the person's face. "Why is it that guy?" Seeing Gu Xian's reaction, Silin shot him a look. "Do you know him?" Gu Xian blinked once in confirmation. Still lying on a tree, Hui Mao looked into the distance. Something was coming from that direction again. A roar broke the silence in the forest. The person who heard the roar cursed in a low voice. He quickened his pace, looking for a place to hide as he ran. Suddenly, his gaze shifted to the place where Silin and Gu Xian were hiding. It was indeed easier to hide there. Gu Xian gave Silin a look, indicating for him to take care of it. Silin agreed. The person who had quickened his pace suddenly stopped when he was close to the place, and the knife in his hand flew towards that direction. Gu Xian, who was already prepared, pushed his knife aside and made a sign language. Seeing this sign language, the person was stunned. Although he was still on guard, since there were people chasing after him, he put down the dispute in front of him and let Gu Xian lead him to hide in the bushes behind a slope. He had smeared some plant liquid on his body, which had the effect of covering up his smell. However, after a long time, the effect had somewhat diminished. Gu Xian sprayed some more liquid on his body. The person did not refuse, but he held the knife in his hand tightly, constantly on guard. As long as Gu Xian made the slightest movement, he would immediately kill him. He was clearly very tired, but when he hid, he adjusted his body's condition to be very suitable for hiding. Not long after, a 5-meter-tall lizard-like thing crawled over. What was different from a lizard was that this fellow had 2 large pairs of pincers in front of it. There were erect spikes on its back all the way to its tail, and its body was covered in thick bony scales. With one look, it was obvious that this ferocious fellow was not easy to deal with. The big fellow stopped in its tracks, and the 2 antennae above its head moved. It was using these sensitive antennae to search for a target. As soon as Silin saw the antennae above the big fellow's head, he knew that he might not be able to hide from this big fellow. He gave Hui Mao a look, and Hui Mao yawned. Just as the big fellow's antennae pointed in their direction and was about to come over, a cat's meow not only attracted the big fellow's attention, but also gave Gu Xian and the other person a fright. Anyone would be startled, and at this kind of tense moment, a strange cat's meow suddenly rang out from above. It would be strange if they didn't jump in fright. Hui Mao meowed as if demonstrating its strength, then spread its claws and jumped into the distance. Seeing that the big fellow was still hesitating, Hui Mao turned around and rushed towards the big fellow. Gu Xian's eyes widened and he looked at Silin. Was he going to sacrifice his pet? But seeing Silin's calm expression, Gu Xian and the other person turned their gazes in that direction. Hui Mao ran over and suddenly sped up. They only saw a gray shadow flash, and then only one of the 2 antennae on the big fellow's head was left. Hui Mao, who had 1 antenna in its mouth, was still swinging its tail in front of them. Gu Xian and the other person. What a ferocious cat! With 1 antenna in its mouth, Huimao ran into the distance. As expected, the big fellow was angry. It let out a loud roar, and the sound waves shook some of the nuts off the tree. Now it was easier to collect the nut. Silin thinks. Once the big fellow was far away, Silin and Gu Xian ignored the other person and quickly went to collect the nuts. It's about time, let's go back, Silin said. They were only 10 minutes away from the hour that Asho said. Silin didn't know what the hailstorm was like here, but it definitely wouldn't be pleasant. It was better to return to the safe zone before it happened. Gu Xian nodded and then looked at the other person. Erdi, wanna go together? Erdi looked at the person who knew his identity, and the young man who was picking up the nuts not far away. He knew that these two people weren't simple, but the current situation wasn't looking good for him. After thinking for a while, Erdi was prepared to refuse. He didn't trust people easily. There's going to be a hailstorm soon. I'm afraid you'll be in trouble if you keep going like this, Gu Xian said before Erdi could refuse. Erdi looked at Gu Xian, trying to discern the truth of his words. Let's go. Silin told Gu Xian to hurry up and leave. It was up to Erdi whether to follow or not. Before Silin and Gu Xian could get far away, Erdi still decided to follow them. Huimao arrived at the tree earlier than Silin and Gu Xian. He was still holding the tentacle in his mouth and playing with it with his claws. Neo was very reluctant to see another stranger. Why do you guys like to pick up baggage so much? Bag? Erdi wanted to kill someone. He had never been called a baggage in his entire life. Looking at the skinny and listless Neo who had just woken up, Erdi felt like he could squash the bastard to death with just 2 fingers. Fortunately, Neo was still sleepy, so he went back to his room after a quick trip to the toilet. Inside the living room, Asho was hugging a glass of juice and curled up in a corner of the sofa. The hiccups that had just stopped were starting again when he saw another stranger with a murderous aura. Silin pointed Erdi to a room with first aid supplies. Knowing Erdi's personality, he wouldn't trust anyone else to treat his wounds. Gu Xian told Erdi who he was while Erdi was cleaning his wounds. Erdi was a celebrity in a certain circle in the 17th Star region. The former leader of one of the top underground forces in the 17th Star region, the Blood Orchid, had adopted Erdi as his son. Later, the Blood Orchid had an internal strife due to some external factors. The former leader was assassinated, and Erdi began his path of revenge. In the next 2 years, a number of important gang members were assassinated one after another. Other than that, Erdi's hit list included the planetary government, some important government officials and nobles from other planets. Later on, some people called Erdi the Flower of Misfortune. I heard that he was turned into a sieve one time, but his body was never found. Not long after, he appeared again and successfully assassinated a few important government officials who were attending a Star Region conference. Since then, Erdi has been on the most wanted list of the 17th Star Region. However, this person disappeared after that, and Erdi never showed up again after his revenge. I didn't think I'd see him here. The Flower of Misfortune, Erdi. A grown man like him probably wouldn't like being called a flower. However, the name did make the faces of some people in the 17th Star region turn pale. Be it the gangs, the government, or the nobles who were once involved in the Blood Orchid struggle, the name was a nightmare to them. Chapter 279. Not long after Silin and the others returned to Neo's safe zone, the sky started to change color. In less than a minute, the clear sky turned dark, and the humidity around them skyrocketed. Crack, crack, crack. Hailstones started crashing into the ground. The descent of the hailstones and the change in the weather caught everyone off guard. If Asho hadn't warned them beforehand, even Silin would have thought in that direction only when the sky changed color. The dangerous elements in this area were not only the biochemical soldiers, the ferocious beasts of various sizes, and the poisonous plants that grew quietly in certain places. Apart from these, there were also all kinds of threatening bacteria and viruses floating in the air. If an ordinary person who had not received any vaccines stayed here, even if there were no biochemical soldiers or ferocious beasts attacking him, he would not be able to survive because the pathological reactions caused by the bacteria and viruses were enough to kill him. Even people as strong as Silin and Gu Xian were hard to defend against in this place. Silin was fine, but Gu Xian and felt it deeply. If they didn't have a hiding spot like this, Silin's little cave would have been very difficult to survive. It would have been hard to make friends with people. Everyone was drinking hot milk tea. Other than Neo, who was sleeping in his room, everyone was sitting in the living room and watching the hailstorm outside on the screen. Right now, was a lot less vigilant, and most of his injuries had healed. Silin and Gu Xian were like him. They were brothers in the same boat. However, still couldn't figure out why Gu Xian was able to recognize him. Hadn't seen any normal humans since he arrived on this planet. He did run into a lot of biochemical soldiers and wild beasts, but he knew he wasn't the only one. He had seen some biochemical soldiers and wild beasts before. They were hunted and killed by humans, but he hadn't run into them before. Why were they here? Didn't know either. He had hidden himself for almost 2 years, and as a celebrity on the most wanted list of the 17th star region, had hidden himself well after his revenge. At least, he thought he did. He didn't expect to be tricked that day. He only remembered seeing a few people before he fainted, and when he woke up, he was already here. Unlike Gu Xian, who had a knife and a gun, didn't have anything with him. He had to kill biochemical soldiers and wild beasts himself. It didn't matter, as long as he could survive. How long will the hail last? Asked. Silin and Gu Xian didn't answer. Instead, they looked at Asho. Asho shuddered and burped. 5 days. 5 days? That's good. I can hold on. Echo let out a sigh of relief. But there will be snow after the hail. Compared to when Silin and the others went out to look for food, the temperature outside had dropped by nearly 20 degrees, and it was still dropping. Who knew what kind of days they would have to go through in the future? How long will the snow last? Silin asked Asho. 6 or 7 days. I'm not sure yet, Asho replied timidly. I won't go out if I can. Looks like I'll have to be frugal and sleep more, Gu Xian said. Silin and the others were holed up in the safe zone. The temperature inside the safe zone was very warm, a stark contrast to the harsh weather outside. The fist-sized ball of ice smashed into the ground, sending shards of ice flying in all directions. By now, both the bio-soldiers and the dire beasts had found a place to hide. In the face of the power of nature, even the strongest dire beasts had to avoid it. The trees inside the forest were very sturdy. Their thick trunks were strong enough to withstand the impact of the hail. Those that couldn't would grow under the lush branches. It was the only way they could survive the natural disaster. As for the other plants, they were smashed to pieces by the hail. But when the hail passed, they would flourish again. This was the power of life. Everyone spent most of the 5 days resting. Neo was a man who slept a lot. Of course, it was a good thing that he could sleep. Everyone wanted to slap him in the face every time he opened his mouth. Neo was very unhappy that so many burdens had come to his place. That was why he ordered Gu Xian, and Asho to take care of some of the chores around the house. In order to save energy, most of the chores were done by humans. Neo didn't ask Silin to do those chores because Silin's "I saved you and helped you find the tricolored beans" was enough to make Neo take back his words. Sometimes, Silin wondered if Neo wasn't afraid that they would gang up on him and take this place for themselves. Or did he never think in that direction at all? The latter was more likely. One day, when the hail had just stopped and snow was starting to take the place of the hail, Neo suddenly let out a loud yell and woke everyone up from their sleep. Who had just finished washing the dishes, was so angry that his hair was about to explode. "What the F***ck are you yelling for?" said irritably while scratching his messy hair. Oh, Neo let out another strange sigh. Oh my God, you motherfucker! Asho glanced at a bracelet-like object on her wrist. One of the metal blocks was flashing. She pressed a button on the flashing metal block, and a small screen popped up. There was an encrypted message made up of characters on it. After reading the message, Asho's crying that had stopped for 5 days started again. Asho and Neo's reactions gave Silen and the others a bad feeling. Oh my God, how could they put that secondary metabolite here? Neo walked out of his room with a dejected expression while grabbing his hair that was sticking up from sleep. What's going on? Silen asked Neo. RB-13 was sent to this planet, Neo said dejectedly. RB-13. A glint flashed across Gu Xian's eyes. If I remember correctly, there used to be an illegal biochemical beast called RA-13. RB-13 is a secondary derivative of RA-13, Neo replied. Weren't they all destroyed? Gu Xian remembered that an entire planet had been destroyed, but that was Black Viper's doing. Since they were the ones who did it, it wasn't surprising that they were able to get their hands on RA-13. But why would someone from Black Viper be interested in a failed product like that? RA-13 was a project that a noble had secretly invested in. When it was discovered and publicized, the Empire took certain measures against it. However, there were too many twists and turns, and too many people were involved. In the end, the matter was left unsettled. But not long after, rumors spread that Black Viper had destroyed the entire planet. RA-13 is a complete failure, but RB-13 isn't much better. The premature aging phenomenon has been resolved, but there are still a lot of problems. How could they throw such an incomplete product into a place like this? It's blah blah blah. Silen wasn't interested in Neo's subjective comment. He asked, why do you say that RB-13 is an incomplete product? Because they can't control themselves completely. They will lose control of themselves if they become agitated and act like lunatic. Do you have a video introduction? Yes, but not all of them. Neo brought up a couple of still images. Huemao's eyes widened. Rats? Apart from the first image that clearly showed a rat, the other images didn't show that it was the same creature as the first one. Unlike the big black rats Silen encountered back at Seven Lights, the biochemical beasts in front of him were mostly white in color. They looked no different from a normal white mouse. It was no wonder that white mice had become a model for biochemical beast experiments nowadays. However, there were only a handful of successful experiments. Why does it look like a hedgehog? Ertie pointed at one of the images and asked. That's one of their forms after they've been agitated. So those things at the back that don't look like rats at all are its other forms. I didn't know you were this smart. Neo looked at Ertie like he was a child waiting to be taught. Ertie clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles cracked. He really wanted to beat the bastard to death. How many of these biochemical beasts are there? Silen asked. I don't know, but I'm sure there are a lot of them. Neo looked very dejected at the mention of this. He didn't expect to run into these things before he came here. At the time, all he wanted to do was to come here and study them as soon as possible. After he signed the consent form and boarded the spaceplane, it was too late for regrets. Even this place can't hold them? Gu Xian looked around. Black Viper was the one who built this place. It'll be difficult. There's a 65.27% chance that the rodents will dig through. Then we'll have no choice but to defend it. Gu Xian looked at the white world displayed on the other screen. He couldn't find another suitable place to hide. Then I'll leave it to you, Neo said. What weapons do you have? Silen looked at Neo. The most important thing right now was to get his hands on a suitable weapon. Otherwise, it would be difficult to deal with the biochemical beast. Not many. Go take a look yourselves. Neo opened a room. There were some guns and cannons displayed inside. It may not be very effective, but it's better than nothing. Let's make do and set up as soon as possible, Silen said after scanning the place once. At the same time, an opening suddenly appeared on a stone wall on the other side of the forest. It turned out that this place had a safe zone just like Neo's. However, the safe zone here wasn't very big. In fact, it was much smaller than Neo's. Moreover, the place was completely covered in ice due to the hail and snow. Even the walls were covered in a layer of ice. Opening a window required one to break through the ice to breathe in the outside air. A face appeared at the window. It was none other than Huali, the dissecting freak that Neo mentioned. Huali looked at the flying snow and the distant forest before closing the window with a whoosh. She returned to the house and opened a couple of big boxes. She took out some of the things inside and put them into a rectangular box that she had prepared earlier. There were some gun barrels and other weapons inside. After she was done, Huali set up the password and closed the safe zone completely. After exiting the safe zone, Huali walked to the edge of a cliff and put a finger to her mouth. A whistle sounded. They didn't have to worry about attracting the biochemical soldiers and wild beasts at this place. A while later, a silver figure flew up from the bottom of the cliff. When she saw the silver figure, Huali jumped down and landed right on top of it. It was a giant silver eagle. It would be about 3 meters tall if it stood on the ground. After Huali had settled herself on the eagle's back, she gave an order and the eagle flew away from the mountain. Huali passed through the forest while sitting on the eagle's back. There were very few flying beasts in the sky right now. The whole place was covered in white. The snowflakes were dense, and the cold wind cut their faces like knives. Thankfully, Huali was wearing a breathing mask. Suddenly, a bestial roar resounded in front of them. Then, a couple of flying beasts took to the air and flew towards Huali and the eagle while clamoring. "Let's not waste time with them right now. Let's change our route first," Huali said. The eagle looked a little unwillingly at the arrogant flying beasts charging towards them. Then, it flapped its wings and changed direction. This way, they would have to detour around a valley. Although it was a little far, they wouldn't have to face the wild beasts chasing after them. It would take them less time to get there. Right now, Huali was in a hurry. She didn't have the time to care about anything else. The eagle flew very fast, and it looked like it was used to this kind of environment. It didn't take long for them to shake off their pursuers. Just as the eagle was about to show off, an alarm suddenly went off in its head and it cried out in a certain direction. Huali quickly took out a couple of parts from her holster, assembled them together and fired a shot in that direction. The bullet scattered as it flew. Bang, bang, bang. The bullet was blocked by something. A figure flashed through the air, and Huali fired several shots in quick succession. Although she couldn't match the enemy's speed, she was used to this kind of situation. She fired calmly and didn't let the enemy get close. Suddenly, the enemy sped up and fired at Huali. But Huali was prepared for this. She changed the gun's gear and pulled the trigger. A huge electric net appeared in the air, blocking the incoming bullets and the figure that was flying over. In order to avoid the lightning net, the enemy had no choice but to change direction and rest on the mountain wall. Now, Huali finally saw the enemy's face. It was a person. To be precise, it was a foreign race. He had wings on his back and could fly. He wasn't wearing shoes, but his toes were nailed to the mountain wall like an eagle's talons to keep him stable. His eyes were a dark gold, and his exposed skin was covered in dark brown lines. The person just stood on the mountain wall and didn't attack again. Huali stayed on the eagle's back and raised her gun, ready to fire the second the person made a strange move. The flying snowflakes almost filled the space between the duo. A normal person would have lost sight of the other a long time ago, but both of them had been on high alert. The eagle didn't stop, and the person on the mountain wall continued to face Huali. He only relaxed when Huali was out of sight. "Hey, Orville, what's going on?" someone at the foot of the mountain asked. "There's a woman riding a giant eagle. Do you know which side she's from?" "I don't know. She's heading that way." "That way? Never mind, let's go back first. The hail is finally over, so let's get something to eat. The captain said he has urgent orders. All right. Orville flapped his wings and retracted his talon-like toes. Then, he flew down the mountain. Celine and the others didn't know about this. Right now, they were watching Neo argue with the person standing outside the safe zone. No, I'm already full. If you come any further, we'll be overpopulated, and it'll put pressure on our environment. It'll also complicate the relationships between members of society, and… Neo didn't finish his sentence because the screen showed Wally pointing a cannon barrel at the door behind the tree. Barbarian! Neo finally pressed the button unwillingly after analyzing all the possible scenarios. After Wally came in, the eagle behind her flew to the cliff and found a place to rest. Neo's expression improved a little when he saw the eagle's self-awareness. He was going to flip out if the big guy squeezed in as well. Bird poop was too disgusting. If the eagle knew what was going through Neo's head right now, it would have torn him apart with its claws. Why are you here? Neo asked Wally in annoyance. I can't take care of those things alone. Do you really think I can? You have equipment here. Wally looked at Neo's lab. Neo ran to the lab's entrance and spread his arms. I'm telling you, I'll fight you to the death if you try to touch my lab. You'll have to step over my dead body if you want to go in. Wally shot Neo an expressionless glance before turning to Asho. Did you fall? Asho nodded with pursed lips and red eyes. Amen, fuck. Wally put down the box on her back and sat down on the sofa. She didn't pay any attention to Celine and the others at all. Celine and the others didn't speak to Wally either. Maybe it was because Wally had dissected too many things, or maybe it was because of her cold personality, but they always felt that Wally's eyes were cold. She looked at everything like it was a corpse, and she looked like she was going to start dissecting with a scalpel in the next moment. Wally was sitting relatively close to Huimao, so the sleeping Huimao's nose twitched a little. He opened his eyes and shot Wally a glance. Puzzled, he got up, walked around Wally and sniffed at her. Wally didn't react to the cat's actions. She shot it a glance, but it was obvious that Huimao was immune to Wally's cold gaze. Or rather, he was a little thick-skinned and didn't take it to heart at all. I smell bird feathers, Huimao said. She came here on a giant eagle, Celine answered. Not that, it's another smell. It's more like the smell of a foreign human. Celine and the others looked at Wally at the same time when they heard Huimao's words. Wally slowly put down her cup and said, I'm not a foreign human, but I ran into a foreign human who can fly on my way here. When Wally had reconstructed Orville's face on the light screen, Ertie cursed in a low voice, Fuck, why is it him? Gu Xian rubbed his chin. He had some impression of this person, but he hadn't come into direct contact with him. It looked like Black Viper's men weren't simple at all. Orville's background was even darker than Ertie's. Chapter 280. Since Wally had left her safe zone to seek help, then the RB-13S that had been released into the safe zone would definitely be able to destroy the sturdy materials outside. Not long after Wally arrived, many large boxes fell from the sky above the planet. They were all made of special materials, and there was a password lock on the outside. The parachutes on top of the boxes opened when they fell from the sky. In the forest, a few beasts that were hunting for food saw the box that fell from the sky and were very curious. After the box fell, these beasts slowly approached it. They walked around the box and sniffed, but didn't smell anything. The box was sealed so tightly that not even the slightest scent leaked out. Moreover, the outside of the box had been cleaned, so the beasts didn't sense anything out of the ordinary. Bang! The sudden noise from the box startled the nearby beasts and caused them to retreat a little. A while later, the beasts curiously approached the box again. Bang! There was another noise, but this time it was even louder. It sounded like something was bumping against something inside the box. The box moved a little. Bang! 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 The noise grew more and more rapid. The beasts had gotten used to it by now, so they didn't retreat as far as they would the first time. Instead, they continued to wander around 3 meters away from the box. Beep! The password lock on the outside of the box rang, and the box was unlocked. The box opened with a click. Its fur, the same color as the snow, was exposed. It looked very harmless. This was the RB-13 that Neo had mentioned. It looked like a white mouse, except that it was a little bigger. With a height of 1 meter, it was much smaller than the beasts around it. The white mouse looked around with its ruby eyes. It didn't seem to feel cold despite the low temperature. After sniffing a little, its gaze stopped on the moving beast. The beasts were no longer afraid when they saw that the white mouse was the only thing that came out of the box. Instead, they treated it like food, opened their mouths and bared their sharp teeth at the white mouse like a tiger watching its prey. When one of the beasts pounced on the white mouse, the others hurriedly followed suit, afraid that they wouldn't get their turn if they fell behind. Mournful cries rang out in the forest. Then, there were the faint sounds of chewing and flesh being torn apart. A while later, all that was left was an empty box and some flesh that was slowly being covered by the snow. The password lock on the box lit up, and the parachute straps on the box broke. The box gradually shrank, and its opening closed. It lay there quietly, buried by the snow. Inside Neo's safe zone, everyone was watching a video in the living room. It was a hidden camera that Neo had placed in a corner of the forest earlier. Since some bioweapons and beasts would sense it when the video was transmitted, he hadn't turned it on until now. But Neo didn't care about that now. Moreover, there weren't many bioweapons or beasts in this weather, so the chances of being discovered were very low. The video showed a primary biosoldier fighting with a dire beast, which attracted a white mouse. Although both the dire beast and the biosoldier were injured, they were still full of fighting spirit. When they saw the newcomer, both sides looked at each other but didn't pay too much attention to it. However, dire beasts didn't like a stranger sneaking up on them while they were fighting. So, the dire beast closest to the white mouse let out a threatening roar. Before it could finish its roar, a white shadow flashed and the dire beast's neck was bitten off. After tossing the dead bioweapons to the side, the white mouse looked at the bioweapons. The bioweapons didn't know what fear was, and neither did they know how to run. Instead, they charged at the white mouse. Brown blood splattered across the snowy ground. The bioweapons were instantly dismembered. A white mouse against a white background, but the combination of colors was enough to make one's hair stand on end. So fast! Gu Xin exclaimed. And its claws are very sharp. Erdi looked at the white figure walking further and further away in the video. He then looked at the patch of brown flesh on the snow that looked like it had been cut by a knife. In just a split second, the white mouse had been able to tear a bio-soldier into such a state. Not only was it fast, its claws were sharp enough to cut through bone without hesitation. Huali didn't say anything. She simply touched her long box. They still have room to grow. Neo added, if every white mouse we send over is like this one, then they're only at the beginning of their growth. Their appetite is huge, their metabolism is fast, and they can grow a lot every day. What? Those things still have room to grow? Does that mean they'll grow even stronger? Erdi asked. That's for sure. Since they're biochemical beasts and were originally experimental subjects, their stability is very low, and their mutation rate is very high. They might be mutating and assimilating at every moment, so the growth of each experimental subject doesn't have a fixed direction. Maybe one of them is an armor type that focuses on defense, and the other one is an aggressive type. Who knows? That's why I said that RB-13 is a failure. Neo still looked down on the RB-13, even though it was a great threat. From an experimenter's point of view, RB-13 was a failure in Neo's eyes. Is that so? I wonder if you'll turn into its feces in a few days, Erdi said mockingly. Do you think I'm an idiot? Why would I provoke those failures? You're the ones who should be leaving. Neo wasn't worried about his life at all. Huali wiped the spear in her hand. Idiot. Neo was about to retaliate when Silin pulled him back. Will the tricolored bean's toxin work? Neo's attention was attracted by Silin's words. I don't know about that. We can give it a try, but we'll have to change the gun first. If we're still using the same gun, we won't even be able to break RB-13's skin. Silin nodded and walked to where Neo kept his weapons. It didn't take long before Silin walked out. Neo, can I borrow a few spare parts from your lab? No. Neo rushed into the lab and raised an arm. If you want to touch my stuff, you'll have to cross my dead body first. Erdi, Guexan, and Huali all looked at Neo. Guexan spun the gun in his hand, Erdi played with a small knife, and Huali raised the sniper rifle she had just assembled. Neo. After a minute of stalemate, Neo twisted his neck and said, I'd rather die than submit. This is my place, and I'm already being merciful by letting you in. If you're alone, you'll die sooner or later if you run into those things. You know that the safe zone can't stop them at all. Even if you have an isolation pod, do you really think you can survive 10 days inside one with your weak constitution? Huali attacked him mercilessly. Neo fell silent. It would be terrible if he had to rely on nutrient fluids to survive. His constitution was very resistant to nutrient fluids, and he had always believed that hibernation would affect his intelligence. That was why he had always rejected both methods. Huali's words were like a sword to Neo's chest. Huali didn't like to be passive, so she immediately chose to find a partner the moment she learned that RB-13 was going to be released into the planet. It would be very difficult for her if she was alone. She couldn't stay on the eagle's back all day, and most of the time, the most dangerous creatures weren't the beasts, but the humans. Huali knew that a lot of strangers had come to this area before she came here. They were probably the reserve newbies the organization had mentioned last time. Asho wasn't the only safe zone that had been taken over. Huali knew that there were 3 of them, but she didn't know if they were taken over through threats or cooperation. Huali didn't know that there were outsiders in Neo's place. She simply thought that Neo's place was a good location, and there were a lot of experimental equipment with great potential. Many people in the organization knew that Neo had high requirements for his experiments, and a lot of the high-end equipment could be used as weapons. That was why Huali had come here. But Huali was even more relieved after she saw Silin and the others. 3 helpers would be a bit more of a guarantee. Neo's face scrunched up like a steamed bun. After a moment of hesitation, he said, Then, you can only use a few of them. You must tell me every equipment you need. Otherwise, they won't be activated without my orders. Of course. After Silin walked into Neo's lab, he stopped in front of a test bench in a familiar manner. There were a couple of instruments on the bench, and after Neo had inputted his orders, Silin deftly dismantled some of the parts on the instruments. Neo was screaming at the side because he was afraid that Silin would destroy them. Both Guexin and Erdi were surprised to see that Silin had dismantled a couple of Neo's precision equipment with a palm compound knife. They didn't know that this guy was capable of this. Guexin and Erdi didn't know anything about Silin. In fact, they hadn't even heard of Silin before. If Guexin was still in the army, he would have been able to learn a lot from Silin, but he wasn't in the army right now. As for Erdi, he had heard of anyone with a bit of fame in the underworld such as Orville. However, he had never heard of Silin before. Silin used some of the parts he had dismantled from Neo's instruments to assemble a couple of simple devices. These devices would allow Silin to modify the guns in the warehouse. Complicated modifications were out of the question, but simple modifications were definitely doable. An hour later, Silin tossed a gun to Guexin and Erdi. He looked at Huali and tossed her a gun as well. Huali caught it. The bullets were modified as well. Neo had synthesized a lot of poison earlier, so it was enough. Let's try it out first. If the poison doesn't work, we'll look for other ways immediately, Silin said after distributing the bullets. It wasn't a good idea to sit around and wait for death. Sillen preferred a prepared fight, and he needed to know his enemy better than anyone else. It was still snowing outside, and the temperature was very low. Sillen and the others put on a thin protective suit and a breathing mask before exiting Neo's safe zone. The protective suit was white and could insulate them from body heat. This way, the wild beasts wouldn't be able to detect them due to the heat. However, their movements were slightly restricted after putting on the protective suit. They wouldn't be as agile as usual. Although Neo said that he wasn't interested in a failed experiment like the RB-13, he was still very concerned about the poison's effect on the RB-13. After Sillen and the others left, Neo entered the data processing room in the lab. There were a lot of RB-13s, and they were scattered all over the place when they landed. There were 3 RB-13s in Sillen's area alone, and the one they were tailing was the one Neo's surveillance camera had captured. It was also the closest RB-13 to the safe zone. When the white dot appeared in their vision, Sillen and the others held their breaths in unison. The white rat had just finished off a wild beast and was chewing on its meat. According to the original plan, Huali and Erdi were responsible for providing cover while Sillen and Gu Xin were responsible for shooting the white rat with the poison. Therefore, Huali and Erdi weren't armed with poison guns, but bullets with higher penetrative power. Since there were trees in the way, Sillen and Gu Xin were able to sneak closer to the white rat. Behind Sillen, Erdi's eyes flashed when he saw the young man sneaking in without a sound. In terms of stealth ability alone, Sillen wasn't as good as Gu Xin. In fact, he was even better than the latter, but they didn't know him at all. That being said, it was strange that Sillen trusted him so much. One shouldn't leave one's back to another so easily. What Erdi didn't know was that if he pointed his gun at Sillen, the yawning Huimao next to him would probably bite him to death. Sillen didn't completely trust Erdi and Huali. That was why he told Huimao to stay next to them so that he could attack them immediately if they made a move. Sillen made a hand signal to Gu Xin after he reached the predetermined position. It was a common gesture used in the military, so Gu Xin naturally understood Sillen's meaning and responded with a "I'm ready" gesture. The duo aimed their guns at the white mouse. Sillen was aiming at the white mouse's ears, and Gu Xin was aiming at the white mouse's eyes. But the moment they fired, the white mouse sensed them and swiftly moved its body, causing the last 2 bullets to hit its torso. However, since both the bullets and the gun had been strengthened, they were able to break the skin a little, and the drugs should be able to seep in. Sillen immediately left the place he was hiding after firing the gun. He didn't even look at where he had hit the white rat. In the next moment, the white rat with 2 wounds on its body scuttled towards Sillen. Sillen didn't stop running. Sensing the movement behind him, Sillen dodged the white mouse's swinging claws and flipped over to kick the white mouse's neck. A white mouse's neck was very fragile, but that was only true for a normal white mouse. RB-13 was undoubtedly a lot stronger than RB-13. Sillen's kick was strong enough to break a tree as thick as a person, but the big white mouse only stumbled a few meters to the side after taking the kick. Gu Xin, Huali, and Erdi all fired at the white rat while it was slowed down by Sillen's kick. A couple of red spots had appeared on the white rat's body. They were the marks left behind by the bullet. However, the white rat was still as ferocious as ever. It ignored the people shooting from behind and chased after Sillen. Did the poison not work? Chapter 281. Sillen dodged a few of the white mouse's attacks with his agility, and the trees around Sillen were cut down like tofu. The red dot on the white mouse's body was slowly shrinking, and it wouldn't be long before it completely healed. This was something no one had expected. After all, the bullet contained a toxin that could swiftly kill a biochemical soldier. What do we do? Erdi asked Gu Xin while searching for an opening to fire. Gu Xin didn't know how to deal with this kind of biochemical beast either. Their muscles were very strong. When they were highly constricted, they could block external physical attack. When a bullet hit them, it would be stuck before it could penetrate deep into their muscles. This kind of big white rat had amazing recovery ability. When the bullet exploded, the explosive force blasted a hole on its body, but it didn't take long for it to gradually recover. Gu Xin felt that they still hadn't found the right target. The noise attracted the attention of some wild beasts that were out hunting for food. Not only did Silin and the others have to deal with the white mouse, but they also had to deal with the incoming wild beasts. Bang! Ertie's bullet blew up the head of a beast that was rushing towards him. However, Ertie didn't show much excitement. On the contrary, he was very worried. The same bomb could easily blow up a beast, but it wouldn't work on a white mouse. Setting aside the white mouse's dodging ability, the effect wouldn't be as obvious as it was on a wild beast. Silin circled around the area and found an opportunity to kick the white mouse from time to time, slowing it down and giving the other three an opening to shoot at it. It was only during this opening that the trio's shots would be much more accurate. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to hit the intended spot. The white mouse's ear was blown up, but it wasn't slowed down at all. However, it was obvious that the white mouse was a lot more irritable than before. Silin and the others' attacks had aroused its killing intent. Its fur stood up like steel needles, and it looked like it was growing longer and longer. Gu Xin and Huali had hit its claws, but it only wavered a little when they were hit. Then, it continued to chase after Silin as if nothing had happened. Silin really couldn't understand why the white mouse was so fixated on him. It hadn't given up even after chasing him for half a day. However, Silin noticed that the big white mouse's ears were pressed down tightly when it ran. Ever since Silin and the others opened fire, it had not pricked up its ears. Bang! It was unknown who shot the big white mouse's paw, but the big white mouse's pursuit slowed down slightly. Silin took this opportunity to fire 3 shots in a row. The bullet bypassed a branch and hit the white mouse's ear. With 3 consecutive explosions, the white mouse's left ear was blown off, and a strange reddish-brown blood stain almost covered the entire left side of the white mouse's face. Squeak! A sharp scream assaulted everyone's eardrums like an ultrasonic wave. The murderous aura of this large white mouse grew even thicker, and the steel needle-like fur on its body doubled in size. Thick scales began to appear on its limbs, all the way to its toes. If this continued, hitting its toes would be useless. Just as the white mouse screamed and began to change, Silin fired 3 more times in succession. The 3 bullets drilled into the areas that had yet to be covered by the needle-like fur. Bang! 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 Reddish-brown blood splattered everywhere, and the white mouse's entire head was only left with a blurry skull and some flesh. They didn't care if the white mouse was dead or not. After Silin opened fire, the other 3 also opened fire at the same spot. All 4 of them fired at the white mouse's ears, and they didn't use poison bullet. Instead, they used explosives. As the banging sounds faded away, the white rat's head was gone. Its body, which had expanded to twice its original size, was still standing there, but it was no longer moving. Dead? Gu Xin and the others cautiously approached the white mice. Just as the 3 of them approached, Silin suddenly shouted, "Be careful!" Since most of their attention was placed on the white mouse, and because the white mouse let out that cry, the surrounding dire beasts hurriedly avoided it. The 3 of them paid less attention to their surroundings. After Silin spoke, Gu Xin and the other 2 became wary of their surroundings. Huali didn't have Silin's reaction speed, but she still reflexively pulled her spear lower. She had just turned her head when a long white whip swept towards her. Unsurprisingly, Huali was sent flying. If she hadn't blocked the divine spear with her spear, she would have been paralyzed by now. The spear that blocked the attack had a dent in it. Huali could easily smash rocks with this spear, but she didn't think that it would be dented by the attack. The white whip was the white mouse's tail. It wasn't the one they had shot in the head, but another one that had come from another part of the area. Right now, Huali's hand was numb from holding the spear, and she couldn't lift it at all. Her back had been scratched by the white mouse's tail, but Huali should be thankful that she wasn't dead or dismembered like the biological soldier. Ertie's situation was slightly worse than Huali's. Although his reflexes were stronger than Huali's, he stumbled just as he was about to dodge. Unable to dodge in time, he could only watch as the claw came crashing down. Squeak! The white mouse screamed again. Ertie crashed to the ground with a bloody gash extending from his chest to his abdomen. If the wound was just a little deeper, his stomach would have been split open. The white mouse, on the other hand, had lost a large piece of flesh from its back, and a reddish-brown strip had suddenly appeared on its originally white body. This was the white mouse that had let out an angry scream just now. Not far away from the white mouse, Huemao's mouth was still sticky with reddish-brown blood. He licked his lips and looked at the white mouse in front of him. Unfortunately, its flesh was harder than he had imagined, and he had only managed to tear off a small piece of flesh. While the white mouse paused because of Huemao, Silin and Gu Xian fired at the white mouse in rapid succession. One of them aimed at the white mouse's eyes, and the other at its slightly open ears. A couple of pops later, the white mouse's head exploded just like the first one. This time, however, they had wounded 2 people. The mouse's claws are poisoned. They need first aid, Gu Xian said after inspecting Ertie and Hua Li's wounds. He looked around and saw that Gu Xian was carrying Ertie, and Silin was carrying Huali. Then, they hurriedly ran towards Neo. Snowflakes were still falling from the sky, and Silin kept looking at the front as he ran. Gradually, Silin's attention was drawn to the snowflakes. Most of them were accumulated snowflakes, but there were also individual snowflakes among them. In Silin's vision, the snowflakes seemed to fall at a speed that was hundreds or thousands of times slower. The perfect hexagonal shape was so familiar. Neo had learned of the situation through the surveillance system while he was hiding inside the safe zone. That was why he had prepared medicine in advance. Silin and Gu Xian brought the 2 people who had been scratched by the white mouse back to the safe zone and placed them in a medical room. Ertie was still relatively clear-headed. He could feel the burning pain of his wounds, but Hua Li's consciousness was already fading. Although Ertie's wound was a lot bigger than Hua Li's, it was obvious that Ertie's resistance was better than Hua Li's due to his constitution. Ertie's wound was brownish-red, and there was inflammation around it. In comparison, the wound on Hua Li's back was a lot scarier. The wound wasn't big at the beginning, but it festered very quickly. The reddish-brown color had spread to almost half of her back. Since Silin and the others were all men, they called Ah Shou over. At first, Silin and the others thought that Ah Shou would cry a little and burp a couple more times. But to their surprise, Ah Shou's hands were steady and practiced even though his eyes were red. Silin asked Neo in private for the reason, and Neo answered in a matter-of-fact manner, "Since I've decided to come to this place, it's only natural that I know basic defensive techniques and how to treat wounds. If I don't even know this, then I might as well kill myself." His words sounded reasonable, but they were surprising when they were applied to Ah Shou. However, he was only surprised for a short while. Silin still had important matters to attend to. The reason why Huemao didn't make a move in the beginning was because Silin had asked it to collect information on the white mice. The information obtained would allow Silin to better understand this biochemical beast. Although these white mice were very tough, Silin was relieved that they were not like the bio-soldiers that did not have a fixed weakness. In other words, once the white mouse's head was blown off, it would be dead, and its body would not continue to move. After calculating the white mouse's defense, Silin realized that all the bullets he had were not enough to penetrate the white mouse. Excluding the accuracy of the shots, it would take 3 bombs to completely blow up a white mouse's head. The poison bullets did not have much of an effect. It would be better if the explosives were faster and more powerful. Unfortunately, the materials he had were limited. He didn't have an endless supply of bullets, but he didn't know how many white mice there were. Silin wasn't stupid enough to fight the white mice with his bare hands. He could deal with them with a longsword, but that was only limited to one-on-one battles. Sillen wasn't stupid enough to fight them with his bare hands when faced with a large number of white mice. He still had to think of a way to get the bullets out, or modify his gun once more. Sillen called Neo over to discuss his ideas. Neo's face scrunched up like a steamed bun again. Based on the materials we have now, the power of the explosion can be increased, but the bullets will be bigger and slower. Based on the data you provided, the white mice have a 73% chance of evading. If that's the case, we might as well use the original explosives. Sillen thinks for a moment before asking, "Don't you have other materials to make more powerful explosives?" "I don't have any other materials that you can use to make more explosives." After all, his research doesn't require them. However, there is a place where he might have other materials. Neo walked into his lab and keyed in a password. A cupboard device opened up, and Neo keyed in a string of characters. Then, he pressed a metal block on his bracelet that looked similar to Osho's. As the metal block flashed, the characters on the device quickly changed. 5 minutes later, Neo frowned and said, "This is ridiculous." "What is it?" "That guy actually compromised with the invaders." Neo was very disdainful. It would appear that the place Neo mentioned was occupied by the same people as Sillen's group. The only difference was that the occupation was a little more intense. "We can't get the materials?" "We can't. That guy is being watched." "How far away is the place you mentioned?" Sillen pulled out a map and had Neo point it out. Neo took a look and pointed at a certain place. "This is it." Sillen estimated that it would take him at least half a day to get there. While Sillen and Neo were discussing the materials for the explosives, Gu Xin came over and called for him. "Sillen, come here for a moment. I have something to tell you." Erdi and Huali should be thankful that Neo had a lot of antidote. Erdi was starting to recover after the treatment, and Huali wasn't as resilient as Erdi, but she had woken up as well. "They look like they're recovering pretty well," Sillen said after inspecting their injuries. Erdi was leaning against the back of his chair with a dark look on his face. "I'm very understanding. I know that people who were scratched by rats have emotions." Neo was expressing his concern and forgiving Erdi and Huali's sullen faces, but he didn't realize that his words sounded like mockery to everyone else. Erdi narrowed his eyes and suppressed the anger he felt because of Neo's words. He said slowly, "I was tricked." Neo motioned for him to speak more clearly, but he was looking at Erdi with obvious suspicion. Erdi didn't have the time to argue with Neo right now. The calmer his voice was, the more angry he was. "I could have avoided that claw attack, but someone shot at my leg." Erdi rolled up his pant leg. There weren't any visible marks on his leg, but upon closer inspection, there was a tiny needle mark. Neo used a testing device to confirm that Erdi's leg had indeed been shot with a plant anesthetic. Neo had researched this plant anesthetic before, but he didn't think it was useful in the end, so he didn't delve too deeply into it. The plant was from that forest, and it was relatively common compared to the tricolored beans. Sillen did notice that someone was nearby at the time, but he didn't look for Erdi and Huali because of their injuries. The person had followed them for a while, but Sillen had asked Hui Mao to lure some wild beasts to stop the person. Gu Xin didn't know about this. "I got it!" Neo suddenly shouted. The chain in his hand flashed, and when he pressed it, a still image of 3 people appeared on the screen. "That's the person who was following us." Hui Mao pointed a claw at a person with 4 eyes. "Heido sent this to me when they weren't paying attention. If you're going to find the materials, you'll have to come into contact with these people," Neo said. "Heido's place was taken too?" Asho asked sympathetically. It looked like she wasn't the only unlucky one. "Heido has the materials you need to improve your ammunition. You'll need to hurry if you want to get them." Heido said that they're planning to do the same, but judging from their intelligence, I think there's a 91.93% chance that they've wasted the materials. If you go now, you'll be able to get between 75% to 33% of the materials, Neo said. Ertie rolled his eyes at him. Why do you have to be accurate to 2 decimal places every time? There's no need to explain to someone with your level of intelligence. Neo turned around and continued to talk to Sillin. Other than the chemicals Sillin was looking for, there were also a few things that Heido had kept away from him for a long time. That's why you should take them back while you're at it. Neo passed a temporary list to Sillin. Sillin glanced at it briefly before replying, I'll bring them to you when I have the time. I'm sure you have the time. Where are you going? I'll go with you. I'm not injured right now anyway, Gu Xian said. Sillin probably wouldn't be able to get the materials by himself. It's fine. Wheeze and I will be fine. You stay here in case someone tries to take this place. Sillin turned him down. Gu Xian was about to say something when he heard that Huimao and Sillin were going together. Ertie and Huali couldn't see it because of the angle, but he saw it with his own eyes. If it wasn't for Huimao dragging the white mouse back with his teeth, Ertie would have been torn to pieces by the white mouse's claws a long time ago. Wait, Huali said, why don't you let Mercury take you there? Mercury? Sillin was puzzled. It's that stupid eagle. Neo explained. You can save a lot of time if you let that stupid eagle take you there. That's perfect. Sillin was pretty curious about the silver eagle. That being said, Mercury was a really strange name. Huali explained Mercury's situation and some techniques to Sillin. Then, she walked to the tree with Ah Shou's help and put a finger to her mouth. A whistle sounded, and a silver-white figure appeared in front of them not long after. Huali gave Mercury a few instructions so that it could familiarize itself with Sillin and Sillin's whistle. Mercury couldn't speak, but it understood what they meant. After crying out twice to indicate that it understood, it lowered its body and allowed Sillin to jump onto its back. Before Sillin could move his feet, Huimao jumped onto Mercury's back and walked a circle on its back. At first, Mercury wasn't used to it. It shook its head and flapped its wings, and gradually calmed down. After Sillin jumped onto the eagle's back, Huali rubbed Mercury's lowered head and told it to be careful. Mercury let out a cry before flapping its wings and flying off. Huali and Ah Shou watched Mercury fly away before returning to the tree. It was his first time riding a giant eagle, so Huimao was very excited. The fierce wind and flying snowflakes didn't dampen Huimao's enthusiasm at all. Out of habit, Huimao started rubbing against Mercury's feathers. Mercury's feathers stood on end, and it lost its balance and swayed in a circle. It almost threw Sillin off. In the end, Sillin had to knock Huimao a little to calm it down. Mercury finally calmed down again. Huimao's tail was still wagging restlessly even though Sillin was holding him down. One look and Sillin knew what Huimao was thinking. Flicking Huimao's ear, Sillin said, What are you thinking now? Huimao scolded back and grinned, Sillin, do you think I'll grow a pair of wings in the future? No, maybe I'll grow multiple pairs of wings. Maybe, but you don't have wings right now, and you need Mercury's help. Don't bully it. Sillin pinched Huimao's ear and said. Got it. Huimao flicked his ear. Although that was what he said, he couldn't get rid of the pair of wings in his heart. If he had wings he could fly, and if he could fly, he could catch birds. It had to be said that a glutton's thoughts always went in the direction of eating. Mercury clearly knew Heido's location very well without Sillin's guidance. It led Sillin straight to their destination. The snow had grown heavier, and everything was white from top to bottom. At the beginning, there were still predators hunting for food, but there were very few of them now. Sillin even saw 2 white mice. The white mice's snowy background made them very difficult to spot, but Sillin could easily distinguish them from the snowy white background. The 2 white mice were still some distance away from Neo's safety zone, so he didn't have to worry about them for now. 10 days had passed. 20 days left. 20 days. At first, Sillin thought that Black Viper's people were trying to select a group of seedlings from this survival test and recruit them into Black Viper to replace some of the older members. But now, Sillin thought that he had learned even more than that. Not only were there people who were brought here to be tested like him, there were also people who were born and raised in Black Viper. These people were ordinary, but they were also extraordinary. They might not be as strong as Sillin, Gu Xin, and Erdi, but they all had their own strengths and specialties. It was hard to understand their way of thinking sometimes, but he had to admit that they were all talented people. Why on earth did they put these people together with the people who were brought here to be tested? Both Guan Feng and Gu Chang'an had told him not to treat Black Viper with the same attitude. What did the real Black Viper look like? It was like the snow in the sky, and it was hard to tell. After flying for a period of time, Sillin gradually approached the destination. Mercury looked to the side and signaled to Sillin that their destination was there. Then, it made a turn and landed at a more secluded place. "I know the route. Find a place to hide and I'll call you when the time comes." Sillin jumped off Eagle's back and said to Mercury. Mercury nodded and shot a glance at Huimao, who was staring at its wings with great interest. Then, it ran away like it was running away from something. Sillin poked Huimao and said, "Come on, let's get to work." Heido was located around the mouth of a volcano. Qin Lai didn't know if the volcano was dormant or active, but it hadn't erupted in the past 100 years. There were a lot of plants growing around it. Evergreen plants made up a large portion of the planet. Even though it was covered in snow, one could still see bits of green from the side. Huimao began scanning the terrain and the structure of the safe zone below. He quickly came to a conclusion and found the entrance. Of course, Sillin and Huimao weren't going to enter through the main entrance. Instead, they were going to enter through a small vent. The three people who occupied this place definitely didn't know much about this place. After all, their time here was limited. Sillin and Huimao came to a secluded vent. It was blocked by a few layers of mesh windows. Huimao cut off the wires connecting the windows to the inside of the safe zone. Sillin took out his tools and quickly removed the window. A man and a cat entered through the narrow vent. After passing through the narrow space at first, Sillin finally arrived at a room in the safe zone. Before Sillin came in, he already knew what this place was based on the structure that Huimao had scanned. It was a spare room where the instruments were stored. Heido was locked in the laboratory next to it. Sillin and Huimao split up. At that moment, Heido, who had dark skin and a chubby face, was squatting in the laboratory. Not far away from her was a fierce-looking man who was playing with a small knife. Not far away, two people were discussing something. The man suddenly put away the knife and sat down next to Heido. He looked at the cowering Heido and said with a smile, "Your reinforcements should be here soon, right?" Heido trembled. Heido wasn't the only one who was surprised. Sillin was also surprised. This man knew that Heido had contacted Neo? When the fierce-looking man smiled, Heido didn't relax at all. Instead, she felt even more scared. There was a type of person who looked more chilling when they were smiling than when they weren't smiling. Sensing Heido's fear, the man raised a hand and rubbed Heido's head. "Don't be afraid, little girl. I'll keep it a secret for you." Sillin. Heido is a girl? No, that's not the point. The point is that there's something wrong with this man. These three aren't from the same group? Sillin decided to observe for a while longer. They hadn't started using the material Sillin was looking for yet. Moreover, Celine also wanted to see what this burly man was planning. "Let's make a deal," the man lowered his voice and said to Heido. The other two couldn't hear him at all. Heido raised her head and looked at the man with puzzlement in her eyes. At first, the other two were prepared to kill her, but this person persuaded the other two to let her live for the time being. The man smiled helplessly. Although his smile looked disgusting, Heido relaxed quite a bit. "If your classmate comes to save you, I can help you kill those two. But I hope you can do me a favor." Heido thought for a moment and looked at the man. If he could explain, she would agree. The man let out a sigh of relief. He continued, "It's like this. I need a place to rest. After we take care of those two, you and your classmate can just give me a place to rest. I'll freeze to death if I go out." It sounded simple enough. Heido nodded without any pressure. The man grinned widely, revealing his pearly white teeth. Heido couldn't help but shiver. The other two didn't know what the burly man said, but Selene, who was hiding in the dark, heard it clearly. Sillen told Huimao that if the man really did what he said, then he would let it go. But if he didn't take care of the other two, then Sillen didn't mind Huimao killing him. Inside the other room, the four-eyed man who had trailed Sillen's group and ambushed Erdi was talking to his companion. The topic of conversation was none other than Sillen's group. Selene looked at the two people who were talking to each other, and his hand moved. Bang! Bang! One of them fell to the ground. Although the man had sensed it and retreated the moment Sillen opened fire, and his reaction time was pretty good, the man didn't expect that the bullet would still penetrate his temple. Although the interval between Sillen's two shots was short, it still gave the other man enough time to dodge. Just as the four-eyed man jumped, a knife stabbed him and nailed him to the wall. Chapter 282. The four-eyed man didn't close his eyes even before he died. His eyes were filled with astonishment and resentment because he didn't think that the person who mercilessly stabbed him in the back was his accomplice. Even though he had wanted to kill his accomplice since a long time ago, he didn't think that his accomplice would harbor the same intentions. The attack was too fast. There were no unnecessary movements, no hesitation, no killing intent, and no killing intent at all. Then, it sliced through the four-eyed man's windpipe, severed his neck, and nailed him to the wall. If this place was built with the same materials as Neos, then it would be very difficult to leave a mark on the walls. However, this brawny man's blade had pierced through the four-eyed monster's neck and left a hole in the wall. It was obvious how special his blade was. The blade wasn't big, and its earthy gray blade didn't reflect any light. However, it looked ordinary from afar. Sillen had seen the brawny man play with this blade before. The brawny man skillfully turned the blade over and over in his hands. It looked like he had been playing with it for many years. Some people would withdraw their killing intent after killing too many people. They were like old hunters hiding in the dark, silently delivering a fatal blow to their prey. Judging from this, Sillen knew that this fiendish-looking brawny man had taken more than 1,000 lives, unless this was his nature. It took him less than 5 seconds to finish off these two people. In a fight between experts, life was short. After the four-eyed man was dead, the brawny man walked over and pulled out the blade. Blood dripped down the tip of the blade until there was no trace of blood left on it. Sillen stared at the brawny man cautiously. Although he wasn't aiming his gun at the brawny man, he was ready to fire the second the brawny man made a move. When the brawny man saw Sillen's reaction, he folded the blade and raised his hands to show that he meant no harm. "You're the helper the kid called over?" the brawny man asked. Sillen didn't answer. Instead, he yelled at the room behind the brawny man, "Heido, come out and contact Neo." Heido shrank into a corner when she heard the commotion outside, but her eyes lit up when she heard Sillen's words. She stood up and walked out. The big man standing at the door moved aside to let Heido pass. Heido carefully looked at the big man, then at Sillen, and walked step by step towards Sillen. Sillen tossed a list to Heido, who was walking over. It was Neo's list. "Here are the things Neo is looking for." Heido relaxed when she saw the familiar words on the list. She moved the metal bracelet around her wrist and sent a message to Neo. Then, she went into the laboratory to prepare the medicine. Only Sillen, the burly man, and the two corpses were left outside. Huimao jumped onto the two corpses and began to search for tools. After searching for a long time, he did not find anything useful. There were only 2 modified guns and a knife that he had picked up somewhere. "These 2 guns belong to that little girl, not them," the big man said. "What about yours?" Sillen looked at the big man and did not see any guns on him. No. The big man made a helpless gesture. Those two didn't trust me, so they didn't let me touch the guns. We're not together. We met them in the forest and helped them take care of some wild beast. They said they found a safe place and asked me to come with them. That's why we came here. Oh, and if I hadn't stopped them, that little girl would have died a long time ago. The big man sat down on the ground after saying this, completely ignoring Silen's vigilance. He kept the knife in his hand. Silen looked at the big man quietly and asked, "Who are you?" The big man smiled mockingly when he heard Silen's question. "Just a prisoner. Why did you come to this place?" "I don't know. I woke up in this strange place. If I didn't have a knife in my hand, I would have been eaten by the wild beasts in the forest and turned into a pile of shit a long time ago." The big man sat cross-legged on the ground with one hand on his leg and the other supporting his chin. He looked a little dispirited. Inside the lab, Heido's mood improved a lot when she learned that the young man who saved her was called Silen. "Silen, I'll go with you in a bit. I've prepared everything you asked for, and there are some spare supplies in the lab. Take them with you when you leave," Heido said happily. "You're going to?" Silen looked a little troubled. Was the eagle really strong enough to carry the load? 2 people, a cat, and all those resources? It was going to be a difficult task. "Yeah, I'm bringing the lab with me," Heido said while packing. "Lab?" "Yes, my lab is a little special. It can actually be considered an independent body and can fly." Silen was surprised. Huemao's scan didn't reveal anything special about the lab. He didn't expect it to be so special. "Can I go with you?" The big man looked at Silen, and then at Heido. "You promised me that this place won't be safe after your lab leaves." Heido's lab was the core of this safety zone. Once the lab left, the safety zone's defenses would plummet. Heido nodded. Suddenly, she thought of something and looked at Silen. "Can we take him with us?" Silen didn't agree immediately. They needed help right now, and this man didn't look like a heinous criminal. However, there were too many things to consider under these special circumstances. If something went wrong inside, the safety zone would collapse. Silen pulled Heido over and said a few words to her. Heido nodded and ran back into the lab. A moment later, she came back out and said something to Silen. Silen looked curiously at the big man and signaled for Heido to go back to her work. They would leave immediately after she was done packing. Silen walked up to the big man. The big man waited for his reply. "Tu ba," Silen said. The big man narrowed his eyes. Then, he looked indifferent. "I didn't think someone would recognize me." "A friend knows you. He asked us to take you there. Nice working with you." The big man paused for a moment before chuckling. "Nice working with you." Heido's safety zone was half the size of Neo's. When Silen asked Heido why it was like this, Heido said that Neo had too many demands. When the safety zone was assigned, the guy immediately took it for himself and gave a bunch of excuses and data analysis. Now that he thought about it, it made sense. Given Neo's personality, he had always been a self-centered person. Words like humility and euphemism didn't even exist in his dictionary. Heido had guns, but they weren't like the ones the four-eyed man and the others had obtained earlier. Most of Heido's guns were locked in a secret storage cabinet in the lab, and the ones she had shown them were just some initial test product. Heido also gave Tu-Ba a gun. Silen didn't have any objections. Since Gu Xin trusted this person, it meant that this person was related to the military. Although he didn't know what exactly happened, Tu-Ba was still a trustworthy person for the time being and a great help. Silen had always thought that the most dangerous thing in this place wasn't the biochemical beasts or the wild beasts, but the humans. The invasion would begin when the humans formed small group. No one knew what would happen in the next 20 days, so Silen's goal was to gather all the forces in the surroundings before these small groups matured. After packing up, Heido set the security department's internal system to hibernate. All the access control windows were closed, and the place was completely sealed off. Silen whistled when he came out. Before Mercury appeared, Two bioweapons hiding in a nearby cave heard the whistle and ran over. Sillin raised his gun and fired twice. The gun Sillin used was the poisonous kind. The tricolored bean's poison was useless against the white rats, but it was deadly against the bioweapons. Tuba looked at Sillin thoughtfully when he saw the two bioweapons fall to the ground. Mercury quickly came over. The poor guy was covered in snow and ice shards. He probably hadn't found a suitable place to hide, and the cold wind had almost turned him into an ice sculpture. The second it heard Sillin's whistle, Mercury immediately flew over eagerly. Sillin didn't ride on the eagle this time. Instead, he stayed in the flying lab with Tuba, Heido, and the others. After the lab left the safe zone, it turned into an independent flying structure. It didn't have to endure the cold wind and snow. However, Huimao still chose to sit on the eagle's back. It looked more artistic when you had wings. While flying back to Neo's safe zone, Sillin looked at the scans in Heido's flying lab. The white dots represented the white rats, the blue dots represented the wild beasts, and the brown dots represented the bioweapons. Right now, the blue and brown dots were mostly concentrated in a few places. Those places were probably sheltered from the wind and snow, but the white dots were more scattered. By the time they returned to Neo's safe zone, there were 17 white rats on the scans. Compared to when Sillin went to Heido's lab, he saw more. It looked like the modification of the guns was imminent. Heido's lab merged into Neo's safe zone from the edge of the cliff and made some adjustments to the external facilities. Neo was very unhappy that his zone was partially modified. He blah 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 blah, from internal stability to harmonious development, from local factors to macroscopic adjustments. He made one logical argument after another. However, no one paid him any attention. Other than Tuba, who was surprised to see such a weirdo for the first time, everyone else was numb to it and ignored Neo's protests. After Heido arrived, she busied herself with the merging of the lab and the safe zone. Now that she had obtained the materials Sillin needed, she was starting to synthesize a new bomb. Erdi was very unwilling to accept the fact that the four-eyed man had been killed. If he wanted revenge, it would only be meaningful if he did it himself. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair. Gu Xian was the happiest about Tuba's arrival. Tuba was from the army and was once a high-ranking officer. However, some things happened and Tuba was imprisoned in the Empire's prison for life. 3 years. It's only 3 years, but it's enough to completely destroy a person. It's enough to erase all of that person's achievements. From being respected to being despised by others, it's only been 3 years. Tuba sighed after talking with Gu Xian. That's not your fault. The Empire is too big. It's inevitable that there will be rotten parts, Gu Xian comforted. When I was in there, I used to wonder if my beliefs were wrong. I wondered if the oath we all obeyed back then was wrong, but I gradually stopped thinking about it. Why? Because there's no time for you to think about those things in prison. A moment of carelessness and you'll lose your life. Tuba pointed at his chest. When he was in prison, there were a few times where he had almost been pierced through. How did the Imperial prison end up like that? Gu Xian exclaimed. The Imperial prison? Tuba rubbed his forehead. There are many types of Imperial prisons. Gu Xian didn't ask further when he saw that Tuba didn't want to explain. He patted Tuba's shoulder. It was rare to find someone who came from the same military background as him. Alright, Gu Xian, I want to ask you something, Tuba said. What? Let me be clear. I don't know anything about this place. Just like you, I woke up here. Not that. What I want to ask is, what's the background of that Serene guy? Him. Gu Xian shrugged. I don't know either. There's no file on someone with that kind of ability in the military. I've never seen any files on him. Huimao rolled on the table. When it rolled over and saw Gu Xian's pigtail, its claws itched again. It raised its claws to play with it. Tuba found it interesting. He raised his finger and poked Huimao. Huimao scratched a few marks. Yo, you have a fast reaction. Not only was Tu-Ba not angry, he was even more interested. Gu Xian nudged Tu-Ba with his elbow. Don't provoke it. This little guy is very powerful. Tu-Ba didn't give up. He only stopped after poking his face a few times and scratching a few marks. The materials provided by Heido were very good. They completely satisfied Silen's expectations. Although he could only make a limited number of bombs, it was enough to deal with the white mice. Silen had created 3 types of bombs, and the explosive power and penetrative power of the 3 types of bullets were different. They were suitable for killing white mice and biochemical beasts from different angles. Heido and Neo worked together to set up new defenses and made a batch of microsurveillance devices. They were scattered around the forest near the safe zone. Some scanners were set up at a distance as well. These surveillance devices and scanners were more discreet. The wild beasts wouldn't be able to detect them unless they were in close proximity. There's a white mouse 1,500 meters away. Are you guys going to take it out? Heido shouted at the people in the living room. Coincidentally, Silen had already made a batch of bombs and distributed them to everyone. Let's take out that mouse first. It's going to cause trouble for the safe zone if it gets close. Huali picked up the gun and bullets Silen had left on the table at the center. I'll take care of it this time. Erdi walked out of the room with his gun in hand. He wanted to vent some of his pent-up frustration now that his body had recovered. Erdi, Gu Xian, and Tu-Ba are enough. Huali, you shouldn't go until you're fully recovered. The 3 of them are more than enough, Silen said. Huali frowned and was about to say something when Neo interrupted coldly. It's just a waste of bullets if I'm not fully recovered. Erdi ignored Huali and Neo's sarcasm and left the room first. Gu Xian gave him a reassuring gesture and followed Erdi up the elevator with Tu-Ba. Silen dragged Neo, who was arguing with Huali, by the back of the collar and into the lab. Let's see how powerful the new bullets are and compile the latest data. When it came to data, Neo ignored Huali and turned on the device. Heido also came over to watch. Asho and Huali stayed in the living room and watched the situation outside through the screen. On the screen, Erdi and the other 2 had quickly found a rendezvous point. The 3 of them were spread out in 3 different directions. It was a good place to work together. Once they trapped the white mouse in one place, the other 2 would be able to follow up and kill it no matter where it went. Bang! A bullet brushed past the white mouse's eye socket, penetrated its skin, and exploded there. The explosion destroyed the white mouse's entire eye. Before the white mouse could get angry, 2 bullets came from 2 different directions and hit the spot where the first bullet exploded. 2 explosions later, the white mouse's head was blown off. In reality, the second bullet was more than enough to blow off its head. The third bullet was just a safety precaution. Judging from the data, the first bullet was pretty destructive. The white mouse's brain nerves were damaged, and its movements paused for a moment. This made it easier for the second bullet to hit its target, Heido said excitedly. But if my guess is correct, Erdi's first shot was aimed at the white mouse's eye and missed, Neo criticized mercilessly. That's because the white mouse reacted too quickly and moved in that instant. There's no way the previous bullets would have blown off its entire eye. Silen recorded down the data the machine processed so that it could be used as a reference for the subsequent modification of the bullet. Asho was drinking fruit juice in the living room when she blinked and said, "The sky is going to clear up soon." Erdi happened to hear Asho's words and asked, "How long until it clears up?" 2 days. When the sky clears up, those things will come out again. Erdi twirled the gun in his hand. This time, he wasn't afraid of those things anymore. He had a weapon and a helper, so what was there to be afraid of? Silen told everyone to rest well for the next 2 days after hearing the news because they might not have much time to rest. What would happen after the sky clears up? According to Asho, the temperature would rise rapidly. After the snow melted, parts of the land would turn into puddles and swamps. Would there be even more strange things at that time? Scylla couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. No matter what, they had to be fully prepared. Be it the white mouse, the bioweapon, the alien Huali met, or anyone else who hadn't shown themselves yet, there was bound to be a conflict that needed to be resolved in a violent way. Heido and Neos' new defense system was more than half complete. Sometimes, Scylla would go out and disguise the surveillance cameras outside the branch. Erdi and the others weren't people who could sit around and do nothing. Even when they had enough sleep, they wore protective gear and went into the forest to hunt some wild beasts for practice. When the last snowflake had fallen, the sky slowly cleared up. The hailstorm and snowstorm had come and gone as quickly as it came. The melting snow had flooded some of the low-lying areas, and in those places, round heads popped out of the water one after another, running towards higher ground. Chapter 283. Now that the sky had cleared up, some of the animals that had been hiding for the past few days started to show themselves. The forest was much livelier than when Scylla first arrived, and because of this activity, they could often hear some roars and whines through the surveillance devices in the forest. The angle of predator and prey was always changing. In the past, the ferocious beasts could be considered as one of the overlords here, but after the arrival of the white rat biochemical beast, they could only become the prey. Scylla and his group had cleared out most of the white mice that had been hiding in the forest during the snowstorm, but a few more white mice and bioweapons came to the forest after the sky cleared up. After all, the forest was a good source of food for them. Gu-Xin, Tuba, and Erdi had just gone to the forest to kill 3 white mice, a couple of bioweapons, and 2 wild beasts as food for the day. Every time someone came back from the forest, they had to go through a disinfection process. Neos' obsession with cleanliness wasn't without reason. There were too many germs out there, and no one knew how many new germs would appear after the snowstorm. After all, many germs mutated too frequently, and everyone had to be on guard. Scylla and Neo worked together to create a couple of compound antibody serums in the lab. Everyone was given a shot to prevent infection, especially people like Osho and Heido. If they were seriously infected, it would be very difficult for them to survive. Their constitution made them vulnerable in this area. Huimao counted the days with his claws every day to see how many more days he had to stay here. How was it today? Scylla asked the trio who had just returned from the outside. Gu-Xin, Tuba, and Tuba walked into the newly set-up disinfection room. The disinfection room recorded the germs they carried before they were disinfected, and if there were any new germs, they would take some samples for Scylla and Neo to update their virus database and create a special antibody serum to prevent further infection. It's alright, we're used to dealing with white mice now, so it's easy to kill them. But the number of black bugs has been increasing lately, Gu-Xin said while wiping his face. A lot of black bugs had appeared after the sky cleared up. Their heads were flat and had no eyes, only sensory cells that looked like eyes. They didn't have a single clawed foot. Their walking style was similar to that of a snake, and they were very fast. Although these black insects were only as long as a palm, they had fine, sharp teeth. At first glance, they looked like the spines of a feline's tongue. With these special sharp teeth, they could scrape meat from other animals for food. Most importantly, there were a lot of them. If he encountered these guys, Scylla would choose to use the cryogenic cold beam gun because they were resistant to heat and cold. Of course, if he saw a bunch of black worms, throwing a Molotov cocktail at them was also a good idea. Even if they could withstand heat, they wouldn't be able to withstand fire. These guys usually like to hide underground. I bet the melted snow has flooded some of the low-lying areas, forcing the bugs out, Erdi said. He had killed many of these black bugs today. In short, just don't get bitten by them. Although these guys are small, one bite from them will leave a bloody hole on your body. Tuba had tested the bite force of these black bugs today. They bit through wood like a saw. One bite and the wood would turn into powder. It would be terrible if they bit a human. Scylla's focus wasn't on the bugs. He had a feeling that their appearance meant something. He looked at Asho. The little girl was holding a cup of freshly squeezed fruit juice, and didn't react at all. Did that mean there was no natural disaster? Huimao, who was rolling around on the table in boredom, twitched his ears. He didn't seem too sure. He jumped down and walked around. He looked at Silin and said, "It's going to be an earthquake." Asho, who was drinking fruit juice, choked and coughed. She looked confused. "I don't feel anything. Why would there be an earthquake?" "It's not natural. It's man-made," Huimao said with certainty. He had already sensed the movements of the machines underground. Silin called Huimao over and showed him the map of the surrounding area. "Roughly where will it be?" Silin moved the map screen in front of Huimao. The others also gathered around curiously. Neo was still skeptical. Once Huimao pointed out Huimao's location, he would analyze it to see if he was telling the truth. Huimao raised his paw and pointed at a few points on the screen. Fortunately, Neo's safe zone wasn't close to the epicenter of these earthquakes. It was at the edge of the zone. Although he could feel the tremors, they wouldn't be as strong. Neo let out a sigh of relief when he finished his calculations. If this cat is telling the truth, this place won't be damaged. The materials used to build the safe zone should be able to withstand the tremors. But isn't that Mond's place? Heido pointed at a place close to the epicenter. Mond? That psycho? I don't know him. Neo hurriedly distanced himself from Mond. It was as if knowing Mond would lower his intelligence. Neo and Mond had always referred to each other as that psycho. Silin and the others shot Neo an odd glance at the same time. Up until now, Neo had been publicly recognized as the most psychotic person in the world. However, they were curious about the person who could make even Neo call him a psycho. Mond is a person who understands animal language. He can understand animal cries, facial expressions and body language, Huali explained. No, that's not it. Neo corrected Huali. That psycho doesn't understand animal language at all. It's just a dirty trick. You know, he used to flunk his language classes a lot. It's an undeniable fact that he's always failed his language classes. Huali ignored Neo's explanation and briefly explained Mond to Silin and the others. She was just done when the metal chain on Heido's wrist flashed. Heido pressed it without hesitation, and a young boy with a broom appeared on the screen. Heido, my dear. Who's behind you? Why is that psycho Neo with you? Mond said with a look of disdain. Neo pushed Heido's face away and smiled proudly. He shook his finger and said, 2 mistakes. 1. I'm not with Heido, Heido is with me. 2. The word psycho has always been with you. It's inseparable. On the screen, the corner of Mond's eyes twitched. He looked at Heido, who was pushed to the side, and said, Heido, my dear, tell this psycho to leave. Big Brother wants to talk to you alone. It's urgent. Heido looked at the others and apologized. Then, she covered the screen and ran back to her lab. Did Mond discover that his place is near the epicenter? Huali asked with a frown. Impossible, how could he know? Neo would never believe that Mond had that kind of intelligence. But Heido came out soon and told them that Mond knew that there would be an earthquake at his place. He originally wanted to hide at Heido's place, but Heido had moved to Neo's place already. However, Mond only knew Heido, so he wouldn't beg Neo for help even if he was beaten to death. How did that broom head know that there would be an earthquake at his place? Guexian asked. Silin pointed at a black insect specimen on a shelf in Neo's lab and said, probably through that. After all, a creature that hides underground all year round is more sensitive to changes underground. Can that broom head really understand the black insect's language? Ertie rubbed his chin. He couldn't figure it out. That's just a conjecture based on a statistical analysis and a clandestine method, that's all. Neo insisted on his point of view. No one paid attention to Neo's words. Silin had other thoughts in mind. If there is an earthquake, this place won't be damaged because it's at the epicenter. But other creatures, at least the ones that live around here, will definitely run here. That's true. Tuba agreed with Silen's words. We'll probably be very busy then. While Silen and the others were discussing the problems they would face, Heido's bracelet lit up again. I'm leaving for a moment. Heido ran back to her lab in embarrassment. It didn't take long for Heido to come out. The bracelet's communicator wasn't turned off, and Mond was standing there with a constipated look on his face. Knowing that Mond was too embarrassed to say it, Heido said timidly, Mond and the others want to come over here. I won't allow it. Neo refused without hesitation. The veins on Mond's forehead bulged, but he didn't explode. Instead, he looked at Heido. Heido looked at Silen because she didn't have the heart to do it. She trusted Silen the most out of all of them, and she felt that Silen could solve this problem. He was also the only person who could reason with Neo's uncanny knowledge, so Neo would definitely listen to him. Mond clearly noticed Heido's gaze, but he couldn't see anyone else because of the angle of the screen. However, it was obvious that Heido wasn't looking at the crazy Neo. Us. Silen caught on to the word and asked. Mond has 3 people with him. They're about the same as you guys, Heido explained. Don't worry, they're good people. They even saved my life before. Mond hurriedly said because he was afraid that Silen would refuse. No one was willing to accept a stranger in this kind of environment. Although he couldn't see Silen's face, anyone who could speak at a time like this definitely had some decision-making power. Oh no, there's a burden other than that, psycho! Neo yelled. The faces of the 3 people standing not far away from Mond twitched in unison when they heard Neo's words. Burden? You're the burden, all of you are. Also, that's not how you use the word, is it? That crazy Neo's place is big enough to accommodate all of us. We can help you solve some of your problems. Mond ignored Neo's objection and continued. That won't do. Who knows if you'll become invaders? Are you questioning my character? Character? Do you even have that? Silen patted Neo's shoulder and pointed at the lab when he saw that Neo and Mond were arguing again. Your molecular diagram is complete. Neo was no longer in the mood to argue with Mond when the molecular diagram was mentioned. He hurriedly ran to the lab. It was a lot quieter without Neo around. Let's continue our conversation. There are 4 people on your side, including you. I want to see the other 3, Silen said. Heido had already adjusted the angle of the screen so that it was facing Silen. Gu-Xian and the others weren't in his field of vision. Silen raised an eyebrow when the other 3 people appeared. One of them was the Orville, that Gu-Xian and Erdi had mentioned before. Wait a moment. Silen left to discuss with Huali and the others. He wanted to confirm if Orville was trustworthy or not. Orville. Tuba twirled the blade in his hand. That kid may not be a good person, but I believe he knows when to advance and retreat. He knows what he should and shouldn't do. Silen looked at Gu-Xian and Erdi. Both of them nodded in agreement with Tuba. It was true that Orville wasn't a good person. In fact, he was notorious in some circles, but he wasn't someone without principles either. Silen then asked Huali for her opinion. After all, Orville was like a ticking time bomb if they didn't get along well with each other. To his surprise, Huali didn't object. Both sides weren't injured at the time, and the past was in the past. When Silen saw Mond's expectant face on the light screen again, Silen allowed both sides to meet each other. Other than Silen, everyone else seemed to have different levels of understanding towards each other. After receiving a guarantee from the other side, Silen went to find Neo and finally managed to convince him to let the 4 of them join him. In fact, Neo just wanted to see Mond's submissive face. It would be a great way to vent his anger. Neo didn't have the heart to think about anything else at all. Those people were far less attractive to him than the experiment he was currently working on. As for how Mond and the others were going to come over, Silen and the others didn't need to worry about it. All they needed to do was send someone to meet them after they arrived. Right now, Silin and Heido were busy inspecting the safety zone and reinforcing some of the defenses. Everyone was busy with their own things, and no one noticed Huimao lying on the table. Huimao's eyes were closed like it was asleep, and its tail wasn't moving at all. If the cat had any nefarious thoughts, it would have wagged its tail a couple of times. Huimao's ears were twitching at a frequency that was hard to discern. Silin glanced at it when he passed by the living room, but didn't disturb it. The cat had probably discovered it. Soon, the forest started to grow restless. The animals in the forest seemed to be quarreling, and some of the animals from other areas had come over to cause a ruckus. "They're here," Heido said while looking at the dots on the screen. Needless to say, Guxian, Erdi, and Tuba grabbed their guns and walked out. The three of them were bored out of their minds, and they couldn't help even when they saw how busy Silin and Heido were. Neo, on the other hand, wasn't involved at all. They weren't of much use other than hunting wild beasts and rats. The three of them felt extremely uncomfortable. It was as if they had suddenly become superfluous. Was this the feeling of being a burden that Neo was talking about? Huali stayed inside the safety zone with great self-awareness. She had realized the gap between her and the others, and her constitution was as fragile as an eggshell compared to Guxian and the others. However, Huali wasn't dispirited by the difference in constitution. Everyone had their own strength. What surprised Huali the most was Silin. Up until now, Silin and Neo had been updating the virus database, creating antibodies and antidotes for a couple of plant and animal toxins, modifying his own guns and ammunition, working with Heido to reinforce the safety zone's defenses, and creating hidden surveillance devices with limited materials. In terms of individual combat strength, Silin wasn't any weaker than Guxian and the others, and his constitution was even better. Up until now, Huali hadn't seen Silin affected by germs or poisoned. What kind of person was Silin? Even in Black Viper, a person like him was rare, not to mention that he wasn't a member of the organization. I really want to dissect a person like him. It was rare that Huali's desire to dissect rose again. Silin, who was setting up defenses outside the safety zone, felt a chill run down his back and made him shiver. Guxian and the others had gone out to welcome Mon's group into the safety zone. One of them had been scratched by a flying beast, and his wound was starting to get infected. It looked like it wasn't just a scratch, but a secondary infection as well. Mond was fine except for his pale complexion. The other two had some minor injuries, but they weren't that serious. The fact that they were able to get here safely proved that they were capable. It probably wouldn't have been this easy if we'd left a little later. Mond gulped down a cup of water and said while panting. It was true that the beasts and other animals weren't this noisy when they left, but now it was like a boiling pot of boiling water. Most of their injuries had come during the second half of their journey, and the one who was scratched had only gotten hurt 20 minutes ago when they approached the area. Everyone had been disinfected after they came in, and to their surprise, the disinfection room had provided them with 6 new types of pathogenic bacteria. They were all from Mond and Orville. When they learned this, they couldn't help but sigh. No wonder their wounds had worsened so quickly. When Mond finally recovered, he saw Huimao lying on the table and his interest was piqued again. It was his habit to interact with animals and read their thoughts. The gray cat grew impatient after being poked by Mond's fingers. It swiped at the back of Mond's hand, and 3 bloody claw marks appeared on the back of Mond's hand despite the hard work it took to get this far without drawing any blood. Looking at Huimao's impatient eyes, Mond swallowed and accepted the restoration spray Sho passed to him. He sprayed the claw marks and obediently stopped provoking Huimao. It only took a single glance for Mond to understand the emotions and meaning behind Huimao's eyes. If Mond poked him again, he wouldn't just be scratching his hand with his fingers. Boom, the tremor began. Through the image displayed on the screen, everyone could see the situation outside. The ground near the epicenter had also cracked. Although it was not a naturally occurring earthquake, If they had not known beforehand that it was man-made, no one would have thought that way. Many animals were already running toward them, especially the black bugs. They didn't see any white rats or beasts, so they probably had to wait a little longer. Celine took out a box and distributed the guns and ammunition he'd made earlier to the group. Among them were the ultra-low-temperature beam guns and a few thousand-degree incendiary bombs. Chapter 284. The panic brought about by the earthquake caused the animals in the forest to scurry away from the epicenter. Some obediently climbed over the cliff and didn't linger on it for too long, but the curious and bloodthirsty wild beasts noticed the abnormality on the other side of the cliff when they climbed over the cliff and moved closer to Neo's safe zone. This kind of wild beast would undoubtedly be hunted down by Gu Xin and the others who were guarding the perimeter. The chaotic environment also covered up Gu Xin and the others' track. Some of the beasts didn't attract too much attention even after they were killed. Perhaps the earthquake was the biggest threat to them right now, not the assassins hiding in the shadows. The modified gun could use improved explosives to kill the white mice, a different kind of bullet to kill the beasts, and poison bullets to kill the biosoldiers. There were also other modes that could be switched between. It was a simple multi-purpose gun. Although it couldn't compare to the guns they had used before, it was still impressive that they could modify a gun to this extent with the limited resources they had. This was why Gu Xin and the others admired Celine. In the eyes of Gu Xin and the others, Celine was an enigma. He seemed to be able to talk to anyone, and he was even able to delve deeper into the topic of anatomy with Huali. Could he be someone from the Aries? That was what everyone suspected. After all, other than Black Viper, everyone would think of the Royal Academy of Sciences as soon as they could find someone who was more accomplished in various academic fields. Erdi had asked Celine about this before, but Celine didn't give him a direct answer. He didn't say yes or no. Since they had made sufficient preparations before the earthquake, they were able to face the white mice and other dire beasts calmly. When they were tired, they would go back to the safe zone to rest and take a breather, and then someone else would take over. The frightened beasts were more violent than usual, and the place was a mess. Gu Xin and the others were much stronger than the people outside because they were able to save ammo and hit their vitals in one shot. There were also some climbing and flying beasts roaming around the cliff walls from below, especially the climbing beasts and insects. They had escaped from the forest and attacked fiercely, but there weren't many of them. Mercury was guarding the cliff wall and cleaning up the insects that had climbed up. Asho and Huali would clear out some of the more troublesome beasts through the windows on the cliff. Mercury's large claws were nailed to the cliff wall, and its wings were flapping furiously as it swatted away a large number of small bugs. Sometimes, the hidden bugs were more of a threat to the safety zone than the big vicious beast. When it flapped its wings, Mercury would also use its sharp beak to peck at those that were not swatted down. Bang! Mercury was startled by the movement beside him. He turned his head to look, and all the hair on his body stood on end. Jie? On the cliff not far from Mercury, Orville changed his form. The sharp claws on the soles of his feet were nailed to the cliff like Mercury. The wings on its back trembled, and feathers shot out like bullets towards the larger insect beast. It was a given that Mercury didn't have a good impression of Orville. After all, their first meeting hadn't been a good one, but they were working together right now, and Huali had told Mercury about it before. That was why Mercury had to endure it no matter how uncomfortable it felt. There was no way it would admit that it was jealous that Orville's feathers could be used as bullets. Heido and Neo were constantly paying attention to the feedback from the defense network around the safety zone. They would contact the others to take out the invaders, if anything went wrong. Where was Celine? Celine didn't go with them. He didn't shoot the wild beasts, nor did he pay attention to the defense network with Heido and the others. Instead, he went underground with Huimao. He had to admit that Huimao's tunneling skills had improved a lot. Practice made perfect, and the more holes he dug, the better he became. Somewhere on the planet, close to the place Guan Feng had brought them to when they first arrived, there was a building that wasn't very tall. Most of the people inside the building were robots, and to be more precise, they were equipped with advanced robots that looked no different from humans outside of the planet. The few humans in the building were all people who had a say in Black Viper, including Guan Feng and Gu Chang'an, who had come with Chiu Su. They were all gathered in a spacious, round meeting room on the 3rd floor. There was a light screen at the center of the room, and it was displaying the image of a spinning planet. It was the planet they were currently on. There were a lot of red and blue dots on the planet, and each dot represented a person. The red dots represented people like Silin, who were not Black Viper people, and the blue dots represented natives of the Black Viper race. On the first day, the red and blue light dots spread out and spread out. Then, they gradually gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, mixed with red and blue, and then huddled together. There were also some light dots that changed in between. For example, the red light dots that represented the 2 people killed by Silin and 2 Ba would turn black after their death. The leader of the group sighed when he saw the dots slowly gathering on the screen. It's only been half the time, and this is already happening. There were 3 spots on the spinning planet where most of the dots were gathered. One of them was where Silin was. The other 2 spots were spread out in different parts of the planet. They were quite far from each other, and they all had different geographical environments and climate. Silin's spot was mostly made up of rocks and forests, while the other 2 spots were mostly made up of desert and plains. Every spot had a different way of fighting, and the reason people gathered here was different as well. In comparison, Silin's spot was the mildest way of gathering people, and it was also Guan Feng's favorite. Guan Feng was very satisfied with Silin's performance, and he was thinking that he could just exempt Silin from AF1's exam and let him pass the exam internally. Someone who could make Neo give up his spot for you definitely has the ability to take over your position. The man looked at Guan Feng meaningfully. Of course. Who taught him that? That said, the people you recommended aren't bad either, Lang. Guan Feng crossed his legs and swung back and forth on his chair. It looked like the 2 people he recommended had succeeded. The man Guan Feng called Lang was one of the 3 leaders of Black Viper, Christian Lang. Gu Chang'an let out a low chuckle. There may be a lot of people who can compete for the other 2, but not everyone can replace Silin. That guy's brain is like a robot's, and his computing power is unparalleled. Shikai, maybe Silin can help you complete your origin plan, Christian Lang said. The man who was leaning on the table at the outer row heard Christian Lang's words and slowly raised his head to look at the spinning ball and the dots of light at the center of the meeting room. He asked suspiciously, "Is that so?" "Maybe." Guan Feng suddenly thought of something and turned to look at Shikai. "Kid, do you think all the robots you put underground will be wiped out?" Shikai frowned. "Is that possible? They're all advanced robots, the latest upgrades. They may not have an origin AI, but their attack power can't be underestimated. Let's watch." Christian Lang touched the screen with his finger and displayed another image filled with dots of light. Shikai stared at the image on the screen. "Actually, I'm more curious about why he went underground. Is it just because he knows that there's something underground that can cause earthquakes? Is it because he wants to stop the earthquakes?" No one knew the answer to this question, and they were all curious. It was exactly because there were so many things they didn't understand that they paid a lot more attention to Silin than the other 2 places. On the other side, Silin followed Huimao underground. The deeper they went, the more Silin could sense the mechanical activity. The thing that caused the earthquakes was deeper, but Silin had arrived at an underground tunnel several hundred meters below the surface. Not even Neo or Heido's scanning devices could detect this place. Although it felt like they were in the wild when they were on the surface, the deeper they went, the more he could sense the presence of machinery. There were traces of machinery in many places, both in the tunnel and elsewhere. Silin and Huimao entered a tunnel. Hui Mao scanned the tunnel and obtained an underground structure that looked like a spiderweb. After memorizing Hui Mao's scan results, Sillin and Kat walked toward the center of the spiderweb. The spiderweb always stayed there quietly, like a silent hunter waiting for the arrival of its prey. Sillin didn't think of himself as prey, but there were many things waiting for him inside the spiderweb. For example, the robots near the center. These robots had completely surrounded the core area. Therefore, if Sillin wished to approach the core area, he would have to break through this layer of robot wall. Go! Sillin unsheathed his longsword and charged toward the robot. A green light flashed in Hui Mao's eyes before he also charged excitedly. These robots had automatically activated their attack mode the moment Sillin and Hui Mao appeared. They were very fast, and their movements weren't stiff at all. The robots' arms and legs were equipped with sawtooth blades, but they didn't use any explosive weapons. Perhaps out of consideration for this underground network, explosive weapons were more destructive to this place, so the creator didn't equip them with such weapons. Even if they didn't have any weapons or high-energy laser guns, their combat power was still very high. Sillin's figure flashed through the air. Every slash of his blade cut a robot in half. The headless robots could still move. Even after their heads were destroyed, their bodies could still react with a delay. These robots weren't the ones Sillin was looking for. Moreover, Sillin knew that these robots weren't autonomous at all. Compared to the robots he had encountered earlier, these robots were pretty good weapons, but they were no different from swords and guns. They were all dead weapons. He kicked a robot's head into the wall of the tunnel, directly turning the robot's entire head into a round pancake. The knife in his hand was not idle either. After the tip of the knife stabbed the robot, a vibration frequency that was difficult for the human eye to capture actually created a dent in the place where the tip of the knife touched. Hui Mao also killed a robot with a single swipe of his claw. He had no qualms dealing with these kinds of robots at all. Moreover, the blades on the robot's arms wouldn't hurt him at all. At most, they would leave a mark that would disappear very quickly. 300 or so robots attacked one after another. Sillin and Hui Mao were grinding these meat into pieces like a meat grinder. The people in the meeting room outside watched the rapidly decreasing signal on the screen. Guanfeng glanced at the tense Shikai and smiled without saying a word. Anyone who knew Guanfeng knew that the more pleased the old fox was, the more he liked to smile without saying a word. It was infuriating just to look at him. 300 robots. In less than half an hour, all the signal dots had disappeared. If they were human, then this meant that they were all dead. Guanfeng shook his feet and tapped his fingers rhythmically on the armrest of his chair. The rhythm of his fingers looked like the beat of a song. He would have started humming a little tune a long time ago if he wasn't restricted by the situation. In this place, Guanfeng didn't have the scholarly and gentlemanly air of a senior scholar at all. Underground, after Sillin and Hui Mao had taken care of the robots guarding the place, they continued to walk toward the core of the spider web. They didn't run into any other robots along the way, but there was a robot at the very center of the place. This robot looked the same as the robot Sillin had taken care of earlier, but its facial expression was completely different. It even had eyes. A person's inner thoughts could be reflected through their glasses. This was a kind of emotional expression, and this robot had the ability to think independently, just like the robots Sillin had encountered before. If one took a closer look, they would notice that this robot was a bit more conscious than the robots Sillin had encountered before. Every look it gave off the illusion that it was alive. This feeling was very familiar to both Sillin and Hui Mao. It was so familiar that it made them excited. This robot was the main reason why Sillin and Hui Mao had gone to such great lengths to find it. As for the cause of the earthquake, that was just a side effect. Neither Sillin nor Hui Mao attacked the robot, and the robot didn't attack Sillin either. Instead, it stared calmly at Sillin and Hui Mao without anger or surprise. It looked like an old man who had gone through all the vicissitudes of life, and the only emotion left in him was indifference. Silen slowly walked toward it. There was a round table next to the robot, and this round table was the cause of the earthquake. There were some buttons on it that could adjust the epicenter and amplitude of the earthquake. The robot didn't react to Silen's approach. It seemed to know what Silen was going to do, so it moved out of the way and allowed Silen to touch the round table. After looking at the settings on the round table, Silen pressed a few buttons. After Silen pressed the buttons, the tremors gradually subsided. The animals who were panicking and running away from the tremors on the ground also gradually came to a stop. Has it stopped? Erdi asked Guexian. I think so. Let's wait and see. Alright. The cessation of the earthquake greatly reduced the pressure on Guexian and the others. Even if they were good at fighting, they wouldn't have an easy time against so many animals and insects. If it weren't for Silen's modified guns and ammunition, the white mice alone would have been enough to force them to retreat. Underground. After the earthquake had stopped, Silen looked at the robot that was standing quietly not far away from him. Still, that wasn't right. This robot didn't have the intelligence of Sigma. Even if it had more consciousness than the robots he had seen before, it was still inferior to Sigma. Even if this robot had a human-like appearance, even if it had facial expressions and eyes, it still couldn't compare to the intelligence of Sigma, who had the appearance of a primordial being. Why did it only change this much after 1,000 years? Chapter 285. Huimao walked around the robot and flicked his ears. That's not right. It is. Silen agreed with Huimao's opinion, but Silen also realized one thing. Sigma's master was definitely connected to Black Viper. Otherwise, this was the first robot Silen had encountered since he came to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. He thought that the robots here would be more like Sigma's, but the reality was far different. Even though the robots he encountered earlier and this one were closer to human consciousness than the Robert family's robots in the League of Stars, they were still far from what he had imagined. Who's your master? Silen asked the robot. The robot seemed to have sunk into its memories when it heard Silen's question. My master has many. Many? Huimao jumped onto Silen's shoulder and stared at the robot. Do you know Sigma? Sigma? The robot's eyes flashed with an indescribable light when it heard the name. However, it was soon replaced by confusion. The name sounded very familiar, but it couldn't remember anything about it. How strange. Logically speaking, a robot's memory should be pretty good. It should be able to record everything it saw and heard, and when it was needed, all it had to do was look for it in its memory. But now, no matter how hard it tried, the robot couldn't find any memories of Sigma. It should have been familiar, but it couldn't remember anything about it. Sigma. I think I know the name, but I can't remember anything about it. Strange, strange. The robot muttered to itself. Silen looked at Huimao. Huimao shook his beard. This robot must be suffering from dementia. Huimao scanned the robot carefully again before saying to Silen, Let's go. We won't get anything out of it. When we get out of here, we'll find the robot maker of Black Viper. Maybe we'll get some answers from him. That's the only way. Seeing that the robot in front of him was still in a state of deep thought, Silen checked the surroundings and left the underground network with Huimao. Since Silen had turned off the earthquake generator, the ground had gradually returned to normal. The mess that was left behind was slowly being repaired. When Silen returned to the safe zone, Guexian, Tuba Orville, and the others were cleaning up the carcasses of the dead animals on the ground. Those that needed to be burned were burned, and those that could be made into meat were kept. After all, they still had to stay here for more than 10 days. They couldn't go without food. The wild beasts that were shot with poison bullets couldn't be used as food. Every time they were hauled away, a detector would be used to inspect the wild beasts. It was a detector Neo had made on the spot, and it was set according to Neo's own standards. If the limit was exceeded, the meat would have to be discarded, no matter how delicious it was. On the other side, Heido, Huali, and Mond were chatting with a couple of strangers. Neo's unhappy face was displayed on the screen Heido was holding. Needless to say, someone must have come to seek cooperation. There were 2 Black Viper members there, and they probably didn't come here together. There were also a couple of strangers with them, and they all looked pretty strong. One of them was a muscular man with a lot of wild beast blood on his body, but he himself wasn't injured at all. It all started during the earthquake. At that time, everyone was busy fighting the vicious beasts, shooting the white mice, and cleaning up the area. Heido, who was in the safe zone, was keeping an eye on the defense system. It was at that time that Heido received a call request on her metal chain. The person who requested the call was also someone who knew the rope. From the moment Heido agreed to the call, the person knew that Heido's location was relatively safe. The feedback from Heido provided him with a lot of evidence. Therefore, the person led a couple of other people who had been tossed here just like Silen and the others. Heido didn't know what to do. This was Neo's territory after all. Before she could clarify things with the person, her metal chain lit up again. Another person had requested a call. Heido had a good personality, and her professional knowledge was great. That was why everyone in Black Viper's territory was willing to contact her instead of spitting on Neo and Mond. Black Viper's thoughts were unimaginable. Sometimes they were twisted to the point where they looked like they lacked a brain. People like them would start a war of words whenever they ran into each other. For example, Neo was currently spouting nonsense to the people outside through Black Doe's communicator. It was rare that Mond was on Neo's side this time. Therefore, one crazy person and another crazy person were basically idiot. Anyone would have wanted to slap them with their shoes if they heard the words coming out of their mouth. The faces of the people who weren't Black Viper were twitching a little. On the other hand, Black Viper's 2 local specialties were able to calmly find grammatical errors in Neo and Mond's sentences. Not far away, Erdi and another person who came with Orville were happily exchanging insults with each other. Normally, they were the ones who would vomit blood in anger, but when they saw these 2 crazy people fighting against the outside world, they felt like their stomachs were cramping up from laughing. When Heido saw Silen's figure, she ran towards him like her savior. Heido, please don't move your bracelet when I'm talking. You're putting me in a difficult position. Neo started complaining again because Heido had moved her bracelet away while he was in the middle of a molecular argument. Now, the screen was moving so that Neo couldn't see her face from the other side. Instead, he was looking at Silen. Heido couldn't care less about comforting Neo right now. She cut off the communication link and explained the situation to Silen. Both parties were surprised and curious by Heido's behavior. Then, they looked at Mond and Huali, the 2 native Black Viper clansmen. They completely agreed with Heido's actions. Why was a person who wasn't Black Viper able to make these Black Viper clansmen with different personalities agree and obey their orders? For example, although Mond had accepted Orway and the others into his safe zone, it was only because Orway and the others had saved his life once. From the bottom of his heart, Mond did not fully acknowledge Orway and the others. He classified it as a special relationship. If Orway and the others ordered or restricted Mond to do what he should or should not do, Mond would not be happy and would resist. It was exactly because they knew that Mond was such a person that Orville and the others decided to borrow Orville's hands and connections to find a way to survive in this unfamiliar environment. Orville and the others didn't object even if Mond wanted to be a team leader on a whim. Survival was their #1 priority, so they might as well let the kid be the team leader. But Silen and Neo were different. Moreover, Mond was more inclined to trust Silen after he learned about Silen's capabilities and Silen's capabilities. What Mond didn't tell the others was that he trusted Huimao more than Silen. The reason Mond could see the right path from Huimao's choice was related to his abilities. Huimao chose to trust Silen, and Mond chose to trust Silen as well. After listening to Heido's explanation, Silen thinks for a moment and said, "Tell them to wait outside. I'll go in and talk to Neo." "All right. Thank you, Silen." Heido immediately let out a sigh of relief when she heard that someone was willing to take on this difficult task. Silen and Heido walked back to the exit at the same time, but it was at this moment almost a dozen white mice suddenly rushed up from the ground behind them. Every single one of them was in a berserk state. Their bodies were covered in spikes, their claws were covered in thick scales, and their tails were covered in ring-shaped spikes that looked like thorny whip. "There's a problem with the defense system. Someone tampered with their defense system. Who could it be?" Everyone in this area had a scanning device installed. It was part of the defense system's surveillance circle. But now, so many white mice had appeared out of nowhere. Moreover, they were all agitated and in a very troublesome biochemical state. Because of the newcomers, Heido wasn't keeping an eye on them inside the safe zone. She was in automatic defense mode, and Neo was busy spitting saliva at the other two. No one noticed that the defense system was acting strangely. Although they didn't see or hear any alarms, it didn't mean that the defense system wasn't acting strangely at all. This turn of events was so sudden that no one noticed it. Gu Xin and Tu Ba were still processing the vicious beast meat in their hands, while Erdi and the others were chatting with the newcomers. Silen and Heido were the closest to the white mice. Silen could definitely escape on his own, but Heido couldn't. Escape with Heido? Their speed would be slowed down. A dozen or so white shadows appeared in a flash. In the blink of an eye, they were only 20 meters away from Heido and Heido. Heido was dumbfounded. When she saw the white mice, she had already calculated how long it would take for them to catch up to her. Less than 2 seconds. Even if she tried to escape now, she would be bitten to death in less than 2 seconds if she was chased by the white mice whose speed had almost doubled in this state. Bang! A few of the white mice that had leaped into the air and were about to tear her apart with their claws. 12 berserk white mice had all fallen to the ground. Every white mouse's head had exploded, and the wound was in the shape of a hexagon. It was a very standard hexagon. Bang, 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 bang. All the white mice that had exploded their heads stopped 1 step away from Silen and Heido due to inertia. The smell of blood unique to the white mice made Heido's stomach churn. It wasn't just a symptom of being overly frightened, it was also the smell. Heido couldn't help but vomit. Gu Xin and the others were still holding their guns. They didn't have time to shoot, or they didn't hit their targets after firing. The berserk white mice were too fast, and their defense was too good. As long as they didn't hit their target, they would be completely ineffective. Looking at the dead white mice on the ground and the wounds on their heads, they knew that none of this had been done by them. The group looked at Silen as if they were looking at a ghost. Mon's jaw almost dropped to the ground. "He's a monster, absolutely a monster." They didn't even see what happened. All they heard was a bang, and then the heads of the 12 white mice bloomed. It was a hexagonal flower, no less. Silen stood in the dead silence with a white gun in his hand. The gun was very strange. It wasn't big, but its proportions were different from a normal gun's. It was hard to imagine that this gun was the cause of such a scene. Those were 12 rats in a state of agitation. Even Gu Xin couldn't guarantee that he could kill them in one shot even if he was fully prepared, let alone 12 of them at the same time. Silen looked at the white gun in his hand. There was an emblem and an S on the gun. It was Guan Feng's Purgatory Thunder Snake S. As expected of Guan Feng's proudest creation, it was also the gun with the greatest damage in the Purgatory Thunder Snake series. Silen sighed in his heart. A great man's temper was the same for a gun. The stronger a gun was, the harder it was to control. If one were to describe this gun in human terms, it would be a freak among humans. Not everyone could tolerate its temper. Silen looked at the blood slowly dripping down his hand. The shot was shockingly powerful, but Silen himself had suffered a negative impact as well. His hand holding the gun was cracked in many places. If Silen's constitution wasn't strong to begin with, his entire hand would have exploded from the negative impact. The Purgatory Thunder Snake S was very different from the K. As expected, different Purgatory Thunder Snake series guns had different temperament. What Silen didn't know was that the three heads of Black Viper were watching the scene on the screen in the distant building. This wasn't something they could have done, but they had been paying close attention to Silen all this time, and the underground network incident had piqued their curiosity about Silen. That was why they were able to see this shocking scene through the multi-angle surveillance cameras of the satellites in space. Everyone, including Guan Feng, felt like they had been sucked in a cold breath when they saw the 12 white mice. However, the tables had turned in less than 2 seconds. The meeting room was deathly silent when they saw the 12 white mice's heads explode almost at the same time. Finally, Christian let out a sigh. Guan Feng, that's your proudest creation, isn't it? I didn't think that you'd let that kid use it. It hadn't been long since Guan Feng created the Purgatory Thunder Snake S. It could be said that no one other than Guan Feng had the chance to touch it. After all, every time Guan Feng designed a new Purgatory Thunder Snake, he would go through a long period of observation. Only those who received Guan Feng's approval were qualified to own a Purgatory Thunder Snake. Every direct disciple of Guan Feng who wanted to use a Purgatory Thunder Snake had to go through many tests, many trials, countless strengthening and adaptation training, and all kinds of observation tests before they could get their hands on a gun marked with the Purgatory Thunder Snake's emblem. The higher the rank of a Purgatory Thunder Snake gun, the longer the test and observation period. Why else would there be so few people who could use a Purgatory Thunder Snake K until now? It wasn't that Guan Feng had set the bar too high or that his requirements were too strict. It was because the Purgatory Thunder Snake gun's characteristics determined that it had high standards for its user. The Purgatory Thunder Snake was very destructive, but at the same time, it was no different from suicide for those who didn't have the ability to use it. It was exactly because they understood this that they were impressed by Guan Feng's unusual treatment of Silen and his boldness. If a student like Silen didn't have the ability to use a Purgatory Thunder Snake S, wouldn't he have no place to cry if he was accidentally shot by a bullet? Everyone looked at Guan Feng with such thoughts in mind, but they didn't realize that Guan Feng himself was shocked. Guan Feng rubbed his forehead with a smile when he saw everyone looking at him. His fingers were still a little cold. He was probably scared by that little bastard Silen. Although he had told Silen to keep the gun, Guan Feng really didn't think that Silen would actually use it. It was because the gun hadn't been perfected at all. At the time, Guan Feng had clearly told Silen not to use the gun. The gun wasn't finished yet, and it could easily cause a suicidal effect. How could Silen not know this when he was using the Purgatory Thunder Snake K? Of course he knew. If it wasn't for the fact that Silen had taken out 12 white mice in the blink of an eye, Guan Feng would have used his personal means to contact Silen and organize the little bastard who didn't know how big the universe was to use S on him. At the time, Guan Feng had placed 3 booby traps on the blueprint. He had intentionally left them there so that anyone who tried to use an S without his permission would suffer the consequences of their own actions. That way, the shooter would be the one to suffer the consequences of his own actions. No one knew how scared Guan Feng was. Even his fingers were cold right now. However, if Silen was able to successfully take out the 12 agitated white mice with the Purgatory Thunder Snake S, then he must have perfected the gun. Silen did have the talent to understand the parts that needed to be perfected after looking at the flawed blueprint. Of course, perfecting a gun was one thing, and succeeding in it was another. One of the high standards of a Purgatory Thunder Snake user was that the user had to be calm and capable of calculation. Every time a new model of the Purgatory Thunder Snake was born, the user's calculation ability would increase to a higher level. The S-Series was especially demanding. Was the guy's brain really that big to be able to complete such a huge calculation in an instant? That was 12 white mice we're talking about. Every additional target doubles the amount of calculation required. What kind of brain does one need to have to do that? Shooting at more than 10 targets at the same time was completely theoretical. Guanfeng was conceited, but he couldn't hit 12 targets in one shot even if he was the one doing it himself. The Purgatory Thunder Snake Model K was fine, but Guanfeng could only prove that the Model S was reasonable in theory. Truth be told, Guanfeng didn't think that someone would be able to do it so soon after the Purgatory Thunder Snake Model S was born. Guanfeng didn't even have time to sigh when he saw Silin take out a knife and start skinning the white mice. Guanfeng nearly choked on his breath. Due to the huge amount of calculations required, the instantaneous high-energy consumption of the brain would cause the shooter to become dispirited or unconscious due to insufficient energy supply to the brain, and there might even be life-threatening situations. But look, that little bastard was still alive and kicking, skinning the white mouse biochemical beast. Silin had no idea how many times he had scared Guanfeng with his actions. All he knew was that the white mice's skin was incredibly tough, and he thought that they could be used to make special protective gear for everyone. They could also be used to make some tools and tools. After all, the tools and materials available in this area were limited, and it was a rare opportunity to run into something good. Of course he had to make the best use of it. Silin neatly skinned one of them before twisting the skinned white mouse up and flinging it into the ground, not too far away. There was a loud boom as the ground cracked and dust spread like mist. It could be seen just how heavy and intensified white mouse biochemical beast was. The explosion woke everyone up from their shock. Huali was the first to act. Her desire to dissect things suddenly skyrocketed when she saw Silin skinning it. She took out a custom-made scalpel and walked next to the white mice that Silin had just finished skinning and tossed to the side. Gu Xian and the others were still holding their guns. Their eyes twitched when they saw Silin and Huali's actions. There were freaks every year, but there were especially many this year. After learning Silin's goal, Gu Xian and the others joined in and started skinning the white mice. Their attention shifted from their shock to the white mice as they continued to skin them. You don't say, these white mice are really strong after they've been activated. Ertie glanced at the skin that looked like a hedgehog and touched its spikes. He clicked his tongue in praise. If they were stuck in a crowd, they'd be skewered right away. Mond was ready, but he couldn't catch mice with his hands. He could only watch from the side with Hey Do and comment from time to time. What did you see? Tuba teased when he saw Mond staring at a white mouse. Mond said thoughtfully, their final expression told me that they died in happiness. Which means that they were killed before they could have any other thoughts. Gu Xian pulled at the hexagonal hole in the white mouse's head and pulled at a few of its whiskers that looked as hard as spikes. He then revealed the white mouse's teeth. Hey, take this and I'll use a tooth as a dagger, Gu Xian said to Tuba. Tuba didn't give it to him, but he managed to cut off a few of the teeth himself. Tisk so hard. Of course. Otherwise, why would I want to use this rat tooth as a dagger? Gu Xian held a large rat tooth in his hand and gestured with it, nodding in satisfaction. Tuba passed one of the treated teeth to Heido. For you to protect yourself. Heido hurriedly caught it. Thank you. Tuba waved his hand and continued cutting the tooth. Neo finally couldn't hold back any longer. He came out to witness the spectacle and collect some samples for research. The 12 white mice's protective skin was soon peeled off, leaving behind only their smooth flesh. However, this flesh was inedible. After being activated, the white mice's toxins multiplied and became even more toxic. More unknown toxic proteins were produced, and these randomly synthesized proteins were exactly what Neo needed. The white mice's flesh gradually changed from a faint reddish-brown to a deep reddish-brown, then brown, and finally black. The change was quick and obvious, just like the flesh of an apple exposed to the air. He sprayed some chemical on the white mice so that the dust wouldn't carry active toxins and spread to the surroundings. Then, he took out a 1000-degree incendiary bomb and burned the white mice to ashes. The reason Sillen was able to deal with the white mice without fear was because he knew that there was no longer any threat in the vicinity. The signal Huimao had detected had already escaped. However, Huimao remembered the signal. Since the other party was playing dirty, he would definitely pay them back double. After dealing with the white mice, Sillen had Gu Xian and the others move the items back. He had a chat with Neo and the newcomers. In reality, the newcomers had only come to test the waters, but after they saw Sillen instantly kill the 12 white mice, they had already made a clear decision. Working with an expert would definitely increase their chances of survival. Although there were a few lunatics here, they had to admit that this was the best place to work at this stage of the game. Now, they were speaking to Sillen in a different tone. They were less aggressive and showed their sincerity. Sillen thought for a moment. Neo's safety zone couldn't hold any more people. Although it still had space, it was easy to get into trouble if there were too many people. Moreover, judging from the two idiots bickering just now, they would probably fight every day if they worked together. In the end, Sillen made a suggestion. He told them to move to the perimeter of the safety zone. Since they were working together, they could help each other out if there was any danger. The other party had some technology that could strengthen Neo's safety zone's defense network once more. This way, there wouldn't be another incident like the one just now. Thankfully, it was Sillen. If it was anyone else, they probably would have been torn to shreds by the white mice's biochemical beast. The two newcomers had a portion of their safety zones that could be moved. If they moved together, they would be able to build a new safety zone with a little more expansion. It would be closer to Sillen's group, and they wouldn't have to deal with Mond and Neo as reinforcements either. Why wouldn't they do it? Even Sillen had sent people to help build the new safety zone. It wasn't like Gu Xian and the others could just sit around and do nothing. Gu Xian even knew two of the newcomers, so they communicated with each other for a while. Just like everyone else, everyone knew nothing about this place. They had all learned this information from the Black Viper tribe. Sillen used the materials the newcomers provided and discussed the problem of the defense system with Heido. They incorporated the technology provided by the newcomers and built some physical defenses both underground and above ground. The surveillance range was expanded a lot, and the concealment methods were improved as well. On the 20th day, the three people gathered at the meeting room's light screen were quite eye-catching. If there are no surprises, it should be those three, Gu Chang'an said. No matter who the other two candidates are, Sillen is the only one who can take over Guan Feng's position. Christy Lang's eyes flashed as he stared at the screen. Shikai hadn't said a word this entire time. He had been especially quiet ever since he received the information from the Underground Network's robots. Chapter 286. When there was a first, there would be a second. When Sillen's safe zone was established not far away from Sillen's safe zone, more listeners came over to request permission to build a subsidiary safe zone around Sillen's safe zone. One had to admit that Neo's safe zone was located in an excellent location. It had survived several natural and unnatural disasters without a scratch. Of course, everyone understood in their hearts that a lot of people valued Sillen's group's comprehensive abilities. Look at the configuration of their surroundings, look at the bullets they used to kill the white mice's biochemical beasts, look at the equipment they were wearing. Even an idiot would know that there was a highly skilled person overseeing this place. This place was different from the outside world. Everyone who came here did not have anything in their hands. It could be said that they had returned to a primitive environment after a night's sleep. Only in this kind of environment could Sillen's wealth better be displayed. Rob? No one would be able to beat Sillen's group, be it openly or secretly. Apart from a few temporary groups from other places, there were also a few people who hadn't split up yet. They were interested in joining after hearing about the situation here. The more people there were, the harder it would be for the vicious beasts to set foot on the mountain. Every person who came here to take this test had taken countless lives. They were all ruthless characters. Everyone knew that their chances of survival would be higher if they stuck together in an environment like this. At first, there wasn't anyone who everyone could trust to form the core of the group. However, after Silen's appearance, everyone showed their sincerity and gathered around him. There was no lack of Black Viper people among them. Every Black Viper people had their own specialties, and they provided a lot of resources that the safe zone urgently needed. As the overall leader, Silen led Heido and the others to build up the defenses around the area. The establishment of any group required skills and talent. Therefore, Silen gathered these people who had their own specialties and assigned them their own task. In 3 days' time, 2 more safety zones had been built on the mountain. The construction of these 2 safety zones was completed by Silen, Heido, and the others. Even if some people were suspicious of Silen's identity and motives, they had to admit that Silen had the ability to better equip the area. Therefore, the new recruits respected Silen mainly because they viewed Silen as a highly skilled person, just like how the people of the Empire viewed a member of the RES. Many people were skeptical of the rumor that Silen had killed 12 white rats in one shot. There were some who wanted to spar with Silen, but they were beaten back as soon as they showed up. Didn't they see that Silen was busy setting up the defensive equipment? If they wanted to spar, that could wait. In a situation like this, the safety zone's construction was their top priority. Neo was the owner of the safe zone, but Silen had unwittingly become the decision-maker of this area. Black Viper's people knew that it was hard to talk to the psychopath, and no one wanted to argue with him if he could handle things himself. The people who weren't Black Viper knew that it was easier to talk to their own kind. After all, not everyone could accept Black Viper in such a short time. The rumors circulating around the Empire had already taken over many people's mind. If Guanfeng and Gu Chang'an hadn't told Silen not to treat Black Viper the same way he used to, Silen would have been on high alert against Black Viper just like them. Heido wiped the sweat off her forehead and directed Tu Ba and the others to place the equipment at the designated locations. She made a good gesture when she saw the satisfactory results on the testing device in her hand. The combatants provided the labor, while Heido and the others provided the technology and brain power. It's pretty much done. 3 of the 4 auxiliary safety zones have been completed, and the last one is still under construction. Heido said to Silen. Silen looked at the completed test data and nodded. Let's rest for now. If we can't do it today, I'll go check on Neo. Silen then looked at Tu Ba and gestured for him to stay on guard. After receiving an affirmative reply, Silen arrived at Neo's safety zone, the so-called core safety zone of this mountain. Rinho was busy analyzing the effects of the medicine in the lab, so he didn't notice Silen's arrival at all. Neo was almost completely focused on the task at hand and didn't pay attention to anything else. Other than Neo, Silen also had permission to enter the lab. Neo had set it up himself because he thought that everyone else in the lab was below the level of a chimpanzee's IQ other than himself and Silen. They weren't worth his time. Silen stared at the results on the screen and asked, "Is the medicine ready?" Neo jumped in fright when he saw that it was Silen, but he immediately returned to his work. "It's ready, but it's not very stable. It needs to be improved, or its effects will be limited." Neo was frowning all the time as he spoke. A lot of people had been eyeing his safety zone as of late, but Neo wasn't in the mood to argue with them. Silen came up with a plan, and that was what Neo had been working on recently. In the past, Neo wasn't a fan of researching white mice. A person like him, who was obsessed with cleanliness, would look down on research subjects that looked like secondary excrement. However, his recent interactions with Silen had piqued his curiosity. He was already rubbing his palms together when he saw Silen's experiment plan. He even boasted that he could complete it in 3 days. But to his surprise, he still hadn't succeeded after 3 days. Although the medicine was ready, it wasn't as effective as he imagined it to be. Therefore, in Neo's eyes, it was a failure. As the saying went, the more frustrated one was, the braver one became. Neo was a one-track mind when it came to this kind of work. Unless he succeeded, he would put everything else aside and focus on this one. Is the molecular formula the same as the theoretical one? Celine asked. After he gave Neo the experiment plan, he had been busy arming the safety zone with Heido and the others. He didn't ask about the progress or results of the experiment. Neo brought up the molecular diagram of the medicine and pointed at 3 spots. These 3 spots aren't stable enough, and the molecule can't be folded to the theoretical effect. I've made a few modifications. Neo moved his fingers and brought up another diagram. This is the modified one. 2 spots have been resolved, and the stability has been verified. However, there's still 1 spot that isn't working. Celine and Neo worked together in the lab for an entire night and finally came up with a stable theoretical molecular diagram the next morning after combining the results of the analysis and the sequence of the active macromolecule with the 4th-order structure diagram. The new molecular diagram was much more stable than the previous ones, and they were very satisfied with its efficacy. It's finally done. Neo started recording the experiment. It was his habit. Celine used the synthesizer to synthesize a portion of the finished product and said to Neo, "Get some rest after you're done." Even with Neo's weak physique, he hadn't rested for more than 3 days. He didn't like to inject hormones or nutrient fluids to maintain his stamina, so he only ate some food irregularly. His complexion didn't look too good, but he couldn't hide the obvious relief and joy he showed after the experiment's success. It made him look a little more energetic. "Of course I know that. I don't need you to remind me." "Oh right, don't let unrelated people come in and disturb me." "Got it." Celine walked out of the safety zone with the synthesized medicine in hand. He glanced around before his gaze fell on a silly cat who was playing with a feather that had fallen off Ovi's body. "Wheeze, come here." When he heard Celine's call, Huimao ran over to Celine while biting the messy feather in his mouth. He jumped onto Celine's shoulder and stuck the disfigured feather into Celine's hair. "Ha ha, meow, Celine, you're so dumb." Celine flicked the feather off his hair and pulled Huimao's whiskers. "I'm done synthesizing the medicine. Let's go take care of those mice." Huimao's eyes lit up when he heard this. He was bored to death right now, so it was good to have something to do. Celine told Heido that everything here was settled and that he needed to give her orders. "You're going to look for that sneaky bastard?" Gu Xian asked. "Yes, I'll be fine alone. I'll give you a signal if there's a need. Just guard this place well. If anyone tries anything, don't hold back." "Of course I know that. But, won't it be too dangerous for you to go alone, ahem, just you and Wheeze?" Gu Xian quickly corrected himself before Huimao could fly into a rage. What were the people who lured the 12 white mice here planning these days? Celine definitely wanted to take care of them before they made their move. "If people respect me, I will respect them tenfold. If you pour a basin of excrement on me, I will give you a cesspool. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." "All right, send a signal if you can't hold on. We have a lot of people here, so it won't be a problem to take care of them." Celine shook his head. "They have a hypnotist who can control a dire beast. It won't be easy for us to take care of them." Although Gu Xian didn't know what Celine was planning, he knew that Celine was a resourceful man. He stopped asking and smiled. "I really want to know what happened to them." "No problem. If everything goes well, I'll send a signal to you guys and let Heido receive the image. You'll be able to see what happens to them. We can also use this as a warning to those who have ulterior motive." Gu Xian shivered. He hadn't known Celine for very long, but his evaluation of Celine was already very high. Even Tuba and Erti were very wary of Celine. This young man was always full of surprises. "All right, I'll wait here for the good news." Celine and Huimao's departure didn't attract too much attention. The construction of the safe zone was still going on. Although there were only 5 days left until the deadline Guan Feng gave them, no one would stop the construction even if it was just 1 day. Every second spent on the safe zone was a chance for them to survive. At another place a bit further away from Neo's safe zone, Silen and the others' new detectors wouldn't be able to detect them. There were 3 people here, and one of them was the person who tricked Silen and the others back then. The other 2 had been brainwashed, or more accurately, deeply hypnotized. It was a type of hypnosis that was forbidden by the Empire. In other words, a person who was hypnotized by this method would become demented even if the hypnosis was lifted. They would never be able to return to normal. All of their memory cells would be erased, and their old memories would be forcefully replaced with new ones. They would be completely under the control of the hypnotist. The hypnotist had retained the 2 people's skills and memories, so they could use their original skills to fight their enemies just like before. Everything else, however, wasn't their own. Silen asked Heido to investigate this place, and it turned out that there were a lot of Black Viper's men in this area. These 2 people probably weren't Black Viper's men. Other than these 2 people, there were also some alien beasts, white mice, and high-rank bio-soldiers around them. A hypnotist like this had a lot of advantages in this place. He didn't have to worry about being attacked by other beasts with these beast puppets. It was this person who had hypnotized the 12 white mice and tricked Silen and the others back then. Who would have thought that Silen would instantly kill the 12 white mice? Right now, this person was resting. Deep hypnosis was a lot more exhausting than normal hypnosis, and the stronger a person or creature was, the more energy it took to hypnotize them. He had just hypnotized another 3 white mice, so he was catching his breath. The expansion of Selene's safe zone had already made a name for itself in this large region. Many people had chosen to seek refuge and cooperate with them, but this hypnotist wanted to take that safe zone for himself. He was prepared to arrange an attack with puppets and monster puppets, then hypnotize the core personnel there and take over that place. Silen and Huimao had split up before they arrived here. They had already released the newly developed drug in a large area with this area as the center. This drug had a special inducer that would excite the white mice and biochemical beasts and lead them to the source of the drug. The net had been cast, and all Silen could do now was wait. Using beasts to control beasts was the best way, wasn't it? Due to the changes in the brains of the hypnotized white mice, they wouldn't react to the drug. Therefore, they just sat there quietly. They didn't react to Silen's drug at all. Since the drug was specially made to target the white mice, the bio-soldiers and beasts didn't react in the slightest. The hypnotist trusted his pets, so he just sat there and rested. Huimao's ears twitched and he signaled to Silen, "They're coming." Silen had also noticed the movement coming from afar. He and Huimao hid there quietly to observe the hypnotist's movements. Finally, the white mice and beasts that had been hypnotized into puppets began to notice something and issued a shrill warning. The hypnotist woke up. He looked around and took out a gun that he had obtained from one of the hypnotized people. He stepped back and let the puppets protect him. There was a cave behind him. If the puppets couldn't hold on, he would close the cave. He had to survive this crisis first. If the puppets were killed, they could be hypnotized again. He wasn't worried about that. At most, he would just have to spend a little more energy. The first white mouse was running toward him. It was obvious that it had been hypnotized. The hypnotist looked at the excited white mouse and frowned. He could tell that the white mouse wasn't hypnotized, but why would such an agitated white mouse run toward him? No matter what, he had to get rid of the white mouse first. The hypnotist ordered the 3 puppet white mice to deal with the white mouse. The 3 white mice didn't disappoint him. Soon, amidst the white mouse's screams, the first white mouse was bitten to death by the other 3. However, this was just the beginning. White mice started appearing one after another, and their numbers were increasing. It wasn't only because of Silen's drug, but also because of the sharp screams of the white mice from both sides. The screams were like a catalyst for the drug, causing the white mice behind to become even more excited. Their bodies expanded and they ran even faster, as if they couldn't wait anymore. Silin gave Huimao a look. Huimao received the order and sent a message to Heido, who was far away in the safe zone. In the safe zone, after Heido received the signal from Huimao, she took out a projector and transferred the signal. The image shown on the projector was the scene Huimao saw. The puppeteer panicked when he saw the increasing number of agitated white mice. He couldn't understand why this was happening, so he sent out all the biochemical soldiers and the 20 or so hypnotized white mice, leaving only the 2 brainwashed people to protect him at the entrance of the cave. The biochemical soldiers and beasts were completely defenseless against the white mice in this state. A few biochemical soldiers were torn apart by the white mice, and with a few stomps of their large claws, they were turned into meat paste. What caught everyone's attention was the battle between the white mice and their biochemical beast. Both sides were agitated white mice, but since they had been hypnotized, it would affect the potential of the white mice. Under the condition of excessive agitation, the natural white mice were more skilled than the hypnotized ones. In the beginning, the hypnotized white mice had the advantage due to their numbers, but slowly, more and more white mice gathered from other places. 10, 20, 30. The scene of the white mice biting and tearing each other sent chills down everyone's spines. These guys were indeed excellent biochemical beast weapons. The collisions, bites, and kicks caused the spikes on their bodies to shoot everywhere. The surrounding stone walls were already covered with a layer of broken spikes. The situation gradually became one-sided. The hypnotist decided to hide in the cave. Before he went in, he felt something hit him, but since he didn't see any injuries, he didn't pay much attention to it. What he didn't know was that the thing that hit him was a soft bullet shot by Silin that was filled with drugs. When the soft bullet hit the hypnotist, it broke and released the drugs, causing them to stick to the hypnotist's body. Therefore, the white mice that came one after another only had eyes for the hypnotist standing in the cave. The hypnotist ordered the 2 puppets to block the cave and retreat into the depths of the cave. However, the digging ability of mice was not to be underestimated, let alone the white mice that were in such a state. 1, 2. After the white mice finished dealing with the puppets, the biochemical beasts began to dig into the hole. Huimao took the opportunity to sneak into the cave. After all, it had a difficult task, live broadcast. Chapter 287. There was no lighting in the cave, and no light shone in, but in Huimao's eyes it was extremely clear, so the signal received by Heido was also very clear. Because it was so clear, every detail could be seen clearly, and it even made people feel like they were there. Ah Shou and Heido's faces turned pale. Although the others were used to seeing blood, they still felt their scalps tingle when they saw so many agitated white mice swarming toward them. At the same time, they became more and more afraid of Silin. Perhaps everyone could not have a specific estimate of Silin's individual combat effectiveness, but Silin's ability was indeed admirable. Some people like Gu Xian might have guessed the means Silin used, but others who did not know Silin could not figure out what method Silin had used to make these white mice deal with the hypnotist. It was exactly because Silin, Heido and the others had been guiding the construction of the safe zone and defense system for the past few days that a lot of people thought that Silin was an expert in this field. However, they didn't realize that Silin was also an expert in the field of medicine. He might not be the best, but compared to the people here, Silin could be considered a highly skilled person. A powerful hypnotist can hypnotize people with every move. Magic's hobby is to directly turn people into his puppets, so his hypnosis is strong and overbearing, completely irreversible. If you don't want to be hypnotized by him and turn into a fool, you must have a stronger willpower than him, or else you won't be able to resist it, and the result will be the same as those 2 people, Gu Xian whispered. The hypnotist was called Magic, and Gu Xian knew him. Although he had never met him before, he had seen information about Magic from some secret files. Magic was also on some lists of the military and was classified as a dangerous person. Looking at the bloody bodies of the two puppets ordered by the hypnotist Magic to intercept the white mice, everyone present felt a chill. Two of them had encountered Magic before. One of them avoided it because of his stronger willpower, and the other escaped because of the help of a temporary companion. So, their experience was the most intense. Inside the cave, the white mice that pounced on him didn't show any change in expression even after their arms were broken. They still followed Magic's orders. The puppets that blocked these white mice were gradually devoured clean. Magic opened the previously dug escape hole and ran outside, but he didn't expect to see two white mouse biochemical beasts running toward him just as he poked his head out of the hole. Magic was desperate. At this time, he couldn't calm down to hypnotize the white mice. He tried, but the result gave him a splitting headache. After all, such a strong and irreversible hypnosis method had side effects. Magic hadn't fully recovered, and he was forced by the situation. His mind was in a mess. Inside the cave, a white mouse biochemical beast had already rushed over while stepping on the puppet's bloodstains. Magic pulled out his gun and started firing, but a gun and bullets of this caliber were nothing more than tickles to the agitated white mouse. Even though Magic's hypnosis was amazing, his marksmanship was trash among trash. He clearly wanted to shoot the white mouse biochemical beast's glowing red eyes even in the darkness, but the bullet hit the white mouse's toe scales instead. The gray cat was crouching on top of a protruding rock at the top of the cave as it watched the live broadcast, shaking its beard. Magic roared as he fired indiscriminately, like a final vent in despair. His voice echoed in the cave, making people's hair stand on end. Finally, the white mouse's claws clawed at Magic. If it was just someone else, the white mouse biochemical beast would at most bite them and eat them, instantly ending the prey's life. But Magic had the drug laid down by Sillen. After the agitated white mice arrived in front of Magic, they did not treat Magic like a puppet. Instead, they surrounded Magic and sniffed him. Their claws scratched Magic's body. Their claws were so deep that bones could be seen, but they were not fatal. But if a group of claws were to scratch him, it would be a different story. The white mouse biochemical beasts inside and outside the cave surrounded Magic and raised their claws a few times. Magic's screams rang for a long time, then gradually weakened until only the sound of the white mice's claws could be heard. The cause of death for the hypnotist, Magic, was excessive bleeding. Such a way of death was very cruel because the injured would clearly feel the loss of blood and the passing of life, as well as the deep sense of despair. At that time, Magic even wanted to use that overbearing method of hypnosis on himself, but in the end, he was unable to do so because he had no energy to concentrate on hypnosis. In fact, Sillen did not expect these white mouse biochemical beasts to treat the hypnotist like this. He always thought that at most, the white mice would follow the hypnotist's scent and kill him with one claw or bite him directly. He did not expect such a bloody method to be used. It was a complete torture. Gu Xian closed his eyes. The famous hypnotist, Magic, ended up like this. He did not know what kind of expression the Austrian army would have when they found out. After all, Magic was personally classified as a high-risk person by them. Everyone who saw this image had the same thought: provoke anyone but Sillen. Perhaps there were some people who came here with a fluke mentality and an attitude of muddling through life, but after seeing this image, everyone changed their attitude. No one was a fool. They understood that this was Sillen's way of beating his opponent. If there was any bad behavior here, it was estimated that it would be the same as the hypnotist, Magic. Huimao closed his eyes after Magic was dealt with and cut off the signal. After yawning, he licked his mouth. So many mice, Sillen stayed outside the cave and listened to the sounds coming from the cave and some white mice being thrown out. He sighed in his heart. There are so many white mice, can't Grandpa Cat judge the situation? Sillen sent a signal to Huimao to quickly retreat and stop playing with these white mice. After playing with the white mice inside the cave for a while, Hui Mao slipped away. If Hui Mao used all his strength to run away, even the agitated white mice wouldn't be able to catch him. Silin shot another 3 soft bullets containing drugs into the cave. After all the white mice had entered the cave, he threw a couple of time bombs inside. Silin let out a temporary sigh of relief when he heard the explosion and the mushroom cloud rising from the other side after running far away. He had taken care of the hypnotist as well as some lab rat. The time bomb he made with those precious materials was not wasted. He looked at Hui Mao, who was licking his claws on a tree branch. There were still bits of the white mice's spikes next to his mouth. "Remember to wipe your mouth clean too." "Got it." Inside the distant building, Guan Feng and the others praised repeatedly when they saw the disappearance of the white mice's signal and the image taken by the satellite array. "Guan Feng, you're a good teacher," Christy Lang said. Guan Feng curled his lips. "Good teacher my ass. I haven't even met that little bastard for long. How am I supposed to teach him? At most, I'm a talent scout who can recognize talent." "Should we put those things over there?" someone asked. Christy Lang thought for a moment before drawing a circle around Silin's area. "There's no need to release them here. We'll proceed with the original plan elsewhere." "So we're just going to leave this area?" "Whatever, it's a waste of resources anyway. Silin is the only one here. We'll follow the original plan for everyone else." "Alright." Gu Chang'an smiled when he heard Christy Lang's words. "If I didn't know better, I would have thought that you were the one who recommended Silin." Christy Lang didn't get angry. "There's no helping it. There are too few people who can take over this position." "That's true. However, we can't say for sure whether or not that kid can officially take over the position." The 3 heavyweights fell silent at the same time. It was true that the final candidate had to be approved by an important decision-maker before he could take over. That person was the true ancestor of Black Viper. After Silin returned to the safe zone, everyone's attitude towards Silin changed noticeably. This was especially true for the newcomers. In the past, they could joke around and punch each other without any scruples, but now they were much more careful. There was no need to offend this fiend because the deadline wasn't far away. What surprised Silin and the others was that the last few days were very peaceful. Most of the white rats had been taken care of at the cave, and the remaining white rats, bioweapons, and ferocious beasts couldn't even take a step forward in front of them. The gray cat rolled from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain out of boredom, teased the wild beasts for a bit, and then climbed up the cliff to bully the great eagle Mercury. This caused Mercury to fly desperately into the sky whenever it saw the gray cat. Thank goodness this cat didn't have wings. What would happen if it did? After Silin and Heido finished setting up the defense network and discussing Neo's incomplete experiment plan with him, the last few days finally came to an end amidst everyone's confusion and worry. The timetable was based on Silin and the others. The 30-day deadline Guan Feng mentioned was actually Silin's 30th day since he arrived at the safe zone. On this day, a couple of huge spaceplanes flew into the safe zone and landed. The people inside them were all robots with human appearances. Black Viper's people had nothing to worry about. They had another spaceplane to receive them, and these spaceplanes would move their labs and workshops away from the safe zone. Silin was the first to step onto the spaceplane. Guxin, Tuba, Guxin, and the others followed behind him. When the spaceplane flew them out of the area and back to a cluster of buildings, Silin separated himself from the others. Unlike everyone else, Guan Feng drove the flying car directly to pick him up. He picked up White Knight on the way. Unlike Silin, White Knight's body was covered in wounds. He wasn't the only one. Everyone on the spaceplane he was on looked a little worse for wear. In fact, White Knight wasn't the only one. Silin's group wasn't the only one. Guan Feng smiled when he saw Silin's puzzled look. "You're different from them." "How so?" "Different roles, different positions, and different requirement." Silin raised an eyebrow. "Take over?" Guan Feng raised his hand and smacked Silen's head. Don't look like I don't like it. It's a good thing. To be honest, the nobles wouldn't dare offend you even if you didn't have the Gen family backing you up. You can send your people to deal with anyone who offends you. Silen and White Knight completely ignored Guan Feng's words. Is this how you teach a student? Where are we going? Silen asked. Somewhere. Of course. Silen rolled his eyes on the inside. We need to contact Nikki and the others first. There's no need. I've already told them. You seem to be prepared for everything. That's not it. It's just like how I didn't expect you to kill those 12 white mice with the Purgatory Thunder Snake S. I was so scared that I broke out in a cold sweat. I even had to force myself to calm down and talk nonsense with those old guys. Guan Feng was both displeased and proud at the mention of that incident. He had never felt so many different things at the same time in his life. White Knight's eyelids twitched. Purgatory Thunder Snake S? 12 white mice. He knew very well that the white mice weren't any weaker than the monsters that appeared later. But what did Guan Feng just say? Kill 12 white mice? White Knight was truly shocked. He thought that Silen wouldn't run into much trouble since he looked fine, but it seemed that things were different. Guan Feng led Silen and White Knight all the way to a port. This port was different from the one Silen landed at. Although most of the passengers were robots, there were some humans here as well. Judging from their appearance, they weren't ordinary people and probably held a lot of weight in Black Viper. The moment he got off the car, Silen immediately felt a few probing gazes on him. One of them was especially intense. Silen looked over and saw that it was a rather ordinary-looking man. He didn't have much of a powerful physique, but the machine language coming from his body was very obvious. Silen could tell. He wasn't a robot, but he was giving off a mechanical signal. Huimao crouched on Silen's shoulder and wagged his tail. He told Silen in private, "This man has a signal similar to Sigma's." This meant that the man in front of them was the one they were looking for. But now wasn't the time. After Silen and White Knight got out of the car, another flying car swiftly landed and came to a steady stop. The man who walked out of this car looked like White Knight. He looked a little ragged, but he exuded a strong aura. Although he had withdrawn his killing intent after the battle, he still exuded an inexplicable and awe-inspiring aura wherever he went. It was obvious that Whis and Silen weren't the type of people who would show respect. Wheeze's tail was wrapped with a feather it had plucked from Mercury's body before it separated from its body. When it swung its tail, the feather would brush against Silen's hair. Therefore, while everyone else was trying to create a serious atmosphere, the man and the cat were swinging his tail and fiddling with the annoying feather. He completely ignored the few heavyweights present at the scene. "Aya, it's you, old man." Huimao pointed a paw at Gu Chang'an, who was being pushed over by Chiu Su, and shouted. Gu Chang'an was still sitting in the wheelchair. Silen didn't understand. He was a man with both legs and feet, so why was he sitting in a wheelchair all the time? Did people in Black Viper all have weird habits? Because the atmosphere was quite serious, it was very quiet here. Other than some mechanical sounds, there wasn't much movement. Huimao's shout was quite loud. "Old man?" Gu Chang'an, one of the 3 giants of Black Viper, was actually called an old man by a cat with a very mocking tone. Therefore, after Huimao's shout, everyone present looked at Gu Chang'an. Even the person with the strong aura just now was full of surprise. Gu Chang'an wasn't angry at all. He reached into his pocket and took out a bag of dried fish. He waved at Huimao. "Kitty, come here. This is the freshly made dried fish." "Everyone." Huimao raised his head. "You want to bribe me with just a bag of dried fish?" Although he said that, the cat had already jumped out and ran to Gu Chang'an in a few steps. He raised his paw and scooped the bag of dried fish into his arms. He even found a comfortable spot on Gu Chang'an's leg and started eating. Silen covered his face. "This is so embarrassing. This was supposed to be a serious occasion, but Huemao's interference made things a lot easier. Guan Feng chuckled and spread his hands at Christy Lang and the others, indicating that it was completely normal. Ignoring the cat issue, Christian Lang sent Silen, White Knight, and the man called Hadar over to him. Do you three understand the positions you're going to take over? White Knight nodded, Hadar nodded, and Silen shook his head. Christy Lang explained the situation to Silen with rare patience. There were 3 leaders of Black Viper, and each of them was responsible for their own domain. For example, Guan Feng was responsible for academics and was more active in the open. White Knight was taking over Gu Chang'an's position, and the people he came into contact with were similar to them. Hadar was taking over Christy Lang's position, a position that was responsible for decision-making and coordination. They hoped that Silen could take over Guan Feng's position. Silen didn't say anything. What do you mean by similar to them? Silen was very confused by this sentence. You want to know the answer? Go find out for yourself. You'll know everything about Black Viper there, Gu Chang'an said from his wheelchair. A space plane descended from the sky while they were talking. When the cabin door opened, Silen saw a young man. He had seen him before at AFI, but he didn't know who he was. After this young man appeared, all the important figures of Black Viper in Christy Lang's group saluted him. The young man also saluted Christy Lang and the others in a different way. He will lead you to the rest, Christy Lang said. For what? Silen asked. To meet the ultimate decision-maker, the progenitor of Black Viper. Speaking of the final decision-maker, whether it was Christy Lang or the young man who had just appeared, all of them held the final decision-maker in high esteem. As for the term progenitor, Silen didn't understand it either. What kind of person could be called a progenitor and receive unadulterated respect from these people? Silen, White Knight, and Hadar stepped onto the spaceplane. Huimao jumped onto it with a bag of dried fish he hadn't finished yet. No one said a word to him. The spaceplane's cabin door closed, and they left the ground and the planet. Their destination was another planet not far from the one they were on. If the star map in his memory was correct, that planet was right at the center of this missing area.